fantasy storylines heading into training camp for the 2021 season. And listen, I can't hit on everything. I hope you understand that. But I do have videos on so many of these other topics, like will Saquon Barkley be back at full strength heading into the start of the season? What should we expect from Dak Prescott? And so much more. So check everything out on the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. Once you're done with this one, let's dive into it. But before we do me a solid. If you enjoy these videos, you think they helped you, hit that thumbs up. It's huge for us here at Awesemo. Subscribing to the channel as well. Help us hit that 5,000 subscriber mark and continue to grow this channel so we can keep putting out great free content. Let's do it. The Steelers have definitely been one of the more difficult teams to figure out this offseason. So hopefully we'll begin to get some answers in training camp. Ben Roethlisberger's coming off a season where he attempted 608 passes and threw for 33 touchdowns while finishing as the QB 14 on the year. But things unraveled late in the season as the Steelers dropped 4 of their last 5 games after starting the year 11-0. Here's the thing, though. Pittsburgh had a really easy schedule during their winning streak, but they also got absolutely screwed by COVID-prompted rescheduling, having to play 3 games in 12 days and 4 in 20. That's a ton. Roethlisberger couldn't have looked worse as that grueling schedule came to a close, but 2021 is a brand new year, even if he isn't getting any younger. I'm actually not even here to talk about whether or not I think Big Ben is going to have a big year. And I mean big from a fantasy perspective, if you know what I mean. But more so to talk about the huge discrepancy in where he's being drafted compared to the rest of the Pittsburgh offense. Check this out. Najee Harris has a second-round ADP, despite the Steelers' offensive line still projected to suck. While Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and Juju Smith-Schuster are all being drafted inside the top 7 rounds. Roethlisberger currently has an ADP of 193 as the 27th quarterback off the board. So it seems like there's a clear disconnect here. Let's see what this team is looking like over the next month and maybe start fine-tuning our decisions. So the question is, if this entire Steelers offense is being drafted inside the 7th round with confidence, shouldn't Ben Roethlisberger be getting some more love? Or are we just overvaluing this entire Steelers offense for 2021? It's got to be one of them. I'll leave the answer up to you. No one wants to talk about the Jets because, well, they're the Jets. But you couldn't count on one hand the teams who have more question marks on offense than New York heading into training camp. Actually, you might not be able to count a single team that has more uncertainty from a fantasy standpoint than the Jets. First off, the backfield, a total unknown. Michael Carter was drafted in the 4th round and has an 8th round ADP in fantasy, despite having no idea what his workload is going to look like. Tevin Coleman's being drafted 7 rounds later and followed both his head coach and offensive coordinator over from San Francisco. Could he be the week 1 starter? Right now, I'd rather take my chances on Coleman as a super late round pick with very little risk. There's also LaMichael Pirine and Ty Johnson, whose roles are clearly undefined as well. And what about the pass catchers? Corey Davis signed a 3-year, $37 million contract this offseason and is coming off his best statistical year as a pro, posting 5 games of 100-plus yards in only 14 starts while averaging 10.9 yards per target and 15.1 yards per reception. Yet he's being drafted behind rookie Elijah Moore, who has yet to play a single snap at the NFL level. And let's not forget that while his role could be downsized, Jamison Crowder is still on the roster, and Denzel Mims was a 2nd-round pick just 1 year ago. All of this is to say that we have no idea what's going on in New York. And that's not even taking into account that a rookie quarterback in Zach Wilson will be under center this year. Believe it or not, there are few teams that I'll be paying closer attention to in camp than the Jets this summer. You should be doing the same. Carson Wentz was so bad last year that he led the league in interceptions and was 2nd in fumbles despite playing only 12 games. It was the type of season you'd think a quarterback could never come back from. But we're about to find out whether or not that's true. Wentz's offensive line was in shambles.
It is the Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive. Pretty similar show to what we did this morning. Adam and I are going game by game, breaking everything down. Some differences. We have some starting pitchers now that we didn't have earlier, but overall, is there anything that's really dramatically changed for you since we did this morning, Adam?
No, pretty much the same stuff. Obviously we'll talk through it again. We do have a little bit more information on pitching that we can dig into, but no, overall, pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, Coors Field still picking up a whole bunch of ownership. The pitchers that were chalk are still chalk, and I think rightfully so. The pitchers that we didn't like as much for ownership reasons earlier, still a lot of the same from what we had earlier. So it's not too much that looks like it's changed, but still there's some things we have to talk about. And, right off the bat, one thing that is a little bit different is in the Yankees Orioles game, because Alex Wells is still going to be on the mound for Baltimore. However, the Yankees, who were originally, not at the time we were doing the show this morning, but Garrett Cole was originally scheduled to start for the Yankees. He tested positive for COVID. He's out. But the Yankees were expected to start Nestor Cortez. Then they switch gears. They're going to start Louis Gill, one of the top pitching prospects in the organization. So let's start with him, just because it's something that we were not able to talk about this morning. What information do you know about Gill as a pitcher?
Really, really good strikeout numbers so far in the minor leagues this season. He made 7 starts at AA, 30 and 2/3 innings, and then threw 30 and a third in 8 starts at AAA. His strikeout percentage at AA was 38.5%. Strikeout percentage at AAA was 27.7%. His walk percentage was elevated, 10% at AA, 16.8% at AAA, but he's minimum salary, so it's pretty crazy to have access to that kind of strikeout stuff, regardless of how many guys he's walking. And then looking individually at his most recent starts, only went an inning and a third on July 27th, but July 21st, he went 6 innings. The game before that, he went 1 inning. Prior to that, it was 3 and 5. So I don't really know what they were doing with his innings limits, but it seems like he's relatively stretched out if the Yankees want him to go, 5 innings or so.
Yeah, and if you do look at his numbers, I think the key thing there is from his minor league stats, the strikeout stuff was really good. The walk rate is also ridiculous. So who knows how deep he's going to be able to pitch in a game for a whole bunch of reasons. Number one, like you said, we don't really know what some of his innings restrictions, what was going on like that in the minor leagues overall this year. 8 starts in AAA, 30 innings, 7 starts in AA, 30 innings. But more so also you look at the strikeout rate where, in AAA, 27.7% strikeout rate, 16.8% walk rate. That generally doesn't lend itself to working very deep into games. So with that in mind, Louis Gill, considering the price point on him, does he have any interest for you in tournaments? 4K on DK obviously wouldn't be a play on FanDuel, but the flat min on DK with some strikeout upside, I could see how that could be appealing to some people.
Yeah, I think so. This is a slate where, we talked this morning, there's plenty of cheap bats, especially in that Coors Field game, but there are some teams that we liked that were relatively expensive, and 4K is just really difficult to disappoint at. So, I think whereas when we did the show this morning, you kind of had Jordan Lyles at 5,100, you had Jose Suarez at 6K, Kyle Freeland at 6,200, sort of being the bottom of the range of guys that we were willing to go to. I do think you can you can add him in here at 4K. You can also potentially add Nick Nyder in it at 4K from Miami. But I just think because of the strikeout numbers, if he goes 5 innings against the Orioles, there's certainly a path to him putting up 15 points or so, similar to what we saw from Chris Rodriguez yesterday with the Angels.
Yeah, and also with Rodriguez, he wasn't an essential piece yesterday, but for the price point, he ended up delivering pretty good results. And for a slate this size, points per dollar, I do think there's a chance that Gill returns pretty good return. But on the other side with the Orioles, this is something that we talked about this morning. I think even becomes more so true now. So with Baltimore, they were priced to face Garrett Cole today. The pricing came out before we found out that Cole wasn't going to be pitching today. So the prices on the Orioles, not this is normally an expensive team, but they're really cheap today. And we look at some of these guys here, other than who was it? So Mancini isn't in the lineup today. So Cedric Mullins is 4,600 on DK. Also on FanDuel, he has a price tag over 3,000. But in general, this is a team that's very, very cheap. And there's a whole bunch of guys that are right around the 2,000 price range. Considering the matchup against Gill, I think this is a viable salary saving stack. We don't know what we're going to expect from Gill. We know the Orioles offense does have some power in it. It's a good hitter's park. So I think this is a team to be overweight to the field on.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's a pretty wide range of outcomes on here. Or here for Baltimore. Their implied run totals jumped about half of a run. and they are really cheap, like you said. So if you're looking to pay up for a couple of pitchers, you can certainly go to the full stack here. But there's also just a lot of power for cheap prices that you can use as mini stacks for one-offs. The only guy on this team that is over 4K on DraftKings is Cedric Mullins, who we know is really good and gives you home run upside and stolen base upside. But then, the Ryan Mountcastle at 3,200 has a lot of power for that salary. Santander at 2K, Hayes at 2,300, Stewart at 2K. These guys all, maybe not the best hitters in baseball, but they all have power for that salary. They shouldn't be that cheap. You should probably at least be talking about Mountcastle being around 4K. You should be talking about Santander, Hayes, and Stewart being around at least 3K. So just a really, really discounted team here where they're still flawed hitters. So the chances of them being the highest scoring team on the slate are still pretty low, but it is a good park for power, and there is plenty of power in this lineup. So even if I'm not going crazy with 5-man stacks, I do like the idea of using them as value. There are certainly guys that you can use at much lower ownership than the value bats in Coors Field.
All right, and shout out to Mike Campbell, who left a super chat, said he was feeling generous, wanted to give a little something back. And also congrats to Mike Campbell, who yesterday came in, I'm pretty sure was second in the knuckleball, $25,000. So congrats to you. That was definitely a big hit. Him and I were DMing a little bit about about it on Twitter last night and this morning. So congrats, Mike, and thanks for the super chat. It is much appreciated. On the other side of this game now, with the New York Yankees offense, and we're already seeing some of the chatter about it in the YouTube chat, people saying, what's wrong with the Yankees? Yankees in a slump. That's kind of be expected. When a team is a chalk stack and fails as horribly as the Yankees did yesterday, there's going to be a lot of people that are a little upset about the Yankees, but it doesn't seem to be deterring the ownership here. The Yankees currently project for 13% ownership on DraftKings. That makes them the second most popular projected stack on the slate, just behind the Colorado Rockies. And then over on FanDuel, we actually have the Yankees as the number one most popular stack on the entire slate, projected for 16.7% ownership on FanDuel. So yesterday, we were fairly low on the Yankees relative to their ownership, but today, with the size of the slate and there being a Coors Field game, there isn't nearly as much ownership going to the Yankees. They're still a little bit overowned, but are you more willing to get to Yankee stacks today than you were yesterday?
Yeah, I think so, because for a couple of reasons. For one, the raw ownership on the Yankees just isn't going to be quite as high on this slate as it was yesterday, since there's twice as many games. For example, looking on DraftKings, Judge is getting 26%, Stanton's getting 21%, Joey Gallo is the next highest at 14%. Whereas, yesterday you were getting, depending on the tournament, 30 to 40% on Rizzo. Stanton was up there. Judge was pushing 50% in some tournaments. So you're getting that down a little bit. And then also, I just don't think Alex Wells is as good as Jorge Lopez is. Not that Jorge Lopez is a great pitcher, but he does have good stuff. He's pretty often he goes his first couple of times through the order and does well, and then he kind of just runs into trouble in the 5th and 6th. You actually saw that yesterday too, but he was able to pitch his way out of it. So I don't think that Wells is as good a pitcher as Lopez. So I think it's actually a little bit better spot for the Yankees and a little bit lower raw ownership. And then on top of that, whereas yesterday you had the Yankees and the Giants just getting a lot more ownership than their top stack percentage said that they should. Today you have the Yankees getting a little bit more, but the Rockies are getting a lot more. The Cubs are getting a lot more. So something we talked about this morning, this to me looks more like a slate where there's not necessarily a lot of teams that are like jumping off the page to me where I think, oh, that's a clear number one stack, I'm just going to have tons of them. It's more so I see teams that I'm pretty confident I'm going to be under the field on, and then I'm just going to put me, a little bit over the field on a lot of other teams. And I think the Yankees are one of those teams where even though they're going a little bit overowned, they are still the high, do have the best chance of being the top stack on the slate, and they're not going as overowned as several other teams.
Yeah, so the game you're talking about specifically is going to be the Coors Field we talk about later. And just because the teams are so popular at Coors Field, it's something we talked about earlier where, Coors Field, if I'm going to have maybe like a third or a quarter of the exposure the field has, even if that, then there's just going to be a lot of teams that we have with like a 3% or 2% projected ownership that I'm going to be like 4 to 5% on. That's how I feel like a lot of my lineups are going to be shaking out today. And then a couple of teams may feel a little bit better out of stacks. But my main leverage on this slate is probably just going to be under-owned. So a lot of these stacks are picking up a whole bunch of ownership. And then pitchers, we'll get more into that as we move along. But one pitcher that's very important on this slate is in the next game, the Philadelphia Phillies on the road against the Washington Nationals. And Zach Wheeler's just not priced appropriately on DraftKings. It's something that's also driving a ton of ownership to him. Over 40% ownership on DK. Zach Wheeler over on FanDuel. His price up to $10,700. So that's only making him have a 18% projected ownership share. For me today, if I'm paying up for one pitcher, it's going to be Zach Wheeler. I know he's going to be popular. I don't care. He's been great this year. He's working deep into games. Strikeout rate is way up this year, and he's facing against a very watered down Nationals offense.
Yeah, agree completely. He's getting a lot of ownership, and on a slate this big, you can always make a case. If someone's going to pull, 40+% ownership, you can always make a case just to go to two pitchers that are getting less ownership, and that's fine. But assuming that you already have a lineup that's relatively contrarian in, what teams you're stacking, who your one-offs are, et cetera, I think the price on Wheeler is just wrong here when you look at some of the other options on the slate and you look at the matchup that Wheeler has. On DraftKings, he's $1,200 less expensive than Walker Buehler. Buehler's going up against the Astros. Zach Wheeler is going up against the Nationals AAA team plus Juan Soto and Josh Bell. Not even exaggerating. I mean, that's what this is. Literally none of these guys were in the major leagues, 2 weeks ago, except for Soto and Bell. So that's not even a comparable matchup. And then you look at the numbers for the season, and Wheeler's got the highest strikeout percentage on the slate. He's got the best strikeout minus walk percentage. He's got the best xFIP. He's allowing 0.58 home runs per 9. There's obviously no guarantee he has a good start here. We've actually seen him struggle over a few recent starts, but it's a really bad Washington team. And then the other thing that we talked about this morning, and this, is to some extent the case for Buehler too, but Wheeler has such a long leash. Even when he runs into trouble, he's not one of these pitchers where, if he gets into trouble in the 5th and narrowly escapes, the Phillies aren't looking to go to the bullpen and get him out of there. They're going to run him right back out there for the 6th and probably for the 7th, depending on the pitch count. They're certainly not looking to get him off the mound at the first sign of trouble. So it just increases his floor a little bit because of the innings that he can pick up for you as well. I just think that the salary is too low on Wheeler here.
Yeah, and to piggyback the point you made before about how none of these guys were in the Nationals lineup regularly a couple weeks ago, of the 8 hitters that are in the Nationals lineup, not including Patrick Corbin, who's pitching for them today, half of them are min price on DraftKings. Andrew Stevenson, Yadiel Hernandez, Adrian Sanchez, and Carter Kieboom. The reason being is that these are minor league hitters. They're not guys who are normally expected to get reps. So as a result, we just have all these guys who are min price. There's actually been recent slates where I've looked to roster some of these guys for salary savings. Not today against Zach Wheeler, but the Nationals are going to continue to remain pretty good sources of value on slates where they're not facing good pitching. If they're just going to continually have pricing where just half the guys are minimum salary. And then talking about guys who aren't big league caliber, Patrick Corbin, even though he has a little bit of name value, is getting paid a whole bunch of money. He falls into that same bin at this point in time. 5.78 ERA, 5.82 expected ERA, basically a replacement level player at this point in his career. Strikeout rate is way down. Velocity is actually still okay, but overall, Patrick Corbin on the wrong side of 30 at this point in his career, and he just appears pretty washed up to me.
Yeah, and the Phillies got Rhys Hoskins back, which was something I'd said this morning was important to me. It's still not the best Phillies lineup because you're missing Andrew McCutchen, but 1 through 4 is really dangerous with Segura, Hoskins, Harper, Realmuto. Then you get to Alex Baum, who is a top prospect, and then the lineup really drops off with Torreyes, Herrera, Lucas Williams. But where Corbin's had the most trouble this year is with right-handed bats. He's only struck out 15.5%. He's allowed a 219 expected ISO. It's going to be difficult, I think, for him to carve through the Segura, Hoskins, Realmuto part of the lineup. And then Harper you can throw in there because he's left-handed. I mean, because he's Bryce Harper, despite the fact that he's left-handed and Corbin's actually been pretty good against lefties. It's just still six total righties in the lineup, knocks down the strikeout projection for Corbin. And then the guys at the top part of the lineup are just scary enough hitters that I'm interested in the Phillies, and it's really difficult, I think, to get to Corbin.
All right, next game here to talk about. It is the Toronto Blue Jays at home against Cleveland Indians, starting with Hyun-Jin Ryu against Cleveland. Has anything changed your opinion before? Ryu, good enough pitcher to the point where I don't want to stack Cleveland at all, but also Ryu is priced at a certain point on this slate where I don't see any real advantage to playing him. The other thing also is that it's not like he's going unowned to the point where he's some crazy contrarian pitching option. We still have Ryu projected on DK for 12.5% ownership, which is right around where it was. I think it might have been like 13% this morning, but that's a lot to pay for Ryu at this kind of salary.
Yeah, there's not really anything about him that stands out to me other than it's a favorable matchup against Cleveland, but he's relatively expensive, especially in the context of the slate. Once you start talking about some of these other pitchers and the strikeout rates that you can get on similarly priced pitchers or even pitchers that are a little bit less expensive than Ryu, he only has struck out 20% of hitters this year. 3.93 xFIP is fine, 1.09 home runs per 9. He's an okay pitcher, but the salary is pretty expensive. And then he's also getting ownership. Like you said, we have him projected for 12.5% ownership ownership, only an 8% chance of being a top 2 scoring pitcher on the slate. He's a good enough pitcher where on some slates, if you were getting like 2 or 3%, I could make a case for him. But for one, this is a bigger slate anyway. And then for two, he's still getting ownership. So it's just really difficult to get to.
Yeah. And then on the other side, the Toronto Blue Jays offense against Zach Plesac. I don't think this is the worst spot in the world for Toronto. Plesac is an okay, but not great starting pitcher. But the key here with Plesac is that he doesn't generate any swing and misses. So he's a guy, 15% K rate this season against an offense with as much power as the Toronto Blue Jays have. You could see him getting into some trouble there where he's not generating any kind of swing and misses. So once again, Blue Jays, another team that's not a high priority offense for me, but with only 2% projected ownership, it's a stack I want to be a little bit overweight to the field on.
Yeah, I really like the Jays here just because, for one, they do have one of the highest leverage scores on DraftKings, in terms of top stack percentage compared to their ownership share. But they also just are a team that make a lot of sense to me in this spot against Plesac, because I know you made the point this morning, and I make it a lot too. I really like going to power hitters against pitchers that don't get strikeouts, because they're just allowing these guys to hit the ball so hard and so far to put the ball in play. And then even more so, when it's a pitcher like Plesac, a lot of pitchers that let you put the ball in play, they get by because they're very good at locating and inducing soft contact. So they kind of dictate where you hit the ball and how you hit it. Plesac's not been that guy. He's allowed a 209 expected ISO to lefties, a 188 expected ISO to right-handed hitters. Overall this year, he's allowed 1.57 home runs per 9. So he's more of a guy that doesn't get strikeouts and also gives up a lot of home runs and power. So to me, that sets up really, really well in the Rogers Center against the Blue Jays. We don't have a starting lineup yet, but there's going to be power basically 1 through 7 at the very least. And they're expensive, but I think that there is enough inexpensive pitching on this slate. There's also enough inexpensive one-offs and mini stacks you can go to that I don't think it'll be that difficult to get to the Blue Jays, but I also don't think they'll really show up in, optimizers if you don't do anything to adjust settings. So that's what's going to keep the ownership down. I really like getting to Toronto right now.
Yeah. To me, it's a team I'm going to be overweight to the field on. It's once again, you and I were both going to be on the same page. I know because we did basically the same version of the show earlier in the day. When we're going to be underweight to the field on a team like the Yankees, it's really popular. We're going to be underweight to the Coors Field game. There's going to be a lot of other teams that just pop up as positively leveraged for that reason. Teams that are going to be 2 to 3% owned from the field that I'm going to be like 5 or 6% on. The Blue Jays are one of the teams that fall into that category. Next game on the slate, it is the Minnesota Twins in Cincinnati. Tyler Mahle on the mound for the Reds. And, I thought that by this time of the day, we would have seen the ownership come down on Mahle, but just not the case. He's still projected for 20.6% ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, he's actually projected to be the most popular pitcher on the entire slate, which is crazy to me. I understand he's 7,900, and that's a very cheap price point for a pitcher with his kind of strikeout upside. But to put it mildly, he's not been good over the last month. He's struggling with his control. The strikeouts have been down a little bit, even though he's still capable of striking guys out. So relative to ownership right now, certainly on FanDuel and then DK as well, he's my least favorite pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, his ownership did drop a little bit as you were talking in our last ownership update, but it's still like 18% on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we have him at 18% also, 17.8% on both sites actually. So I do think he's a better option on FanDuel because even though you roster one pitcher, he's at least at a lower price point than Wheeler and Buehler. And he's also not penalized quite as much. Well, he's not penalized at all for his walks directly on FanDuel like he is on DraftKings. He is sort of penalized because you need him to go 6 innings on FanDuel, and obviously driving up his pitch count with walks isn't the best. But it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that he's getting ownership here. If the ownership were lower, I could, again, make the case to get to him in tournaments because the strikeout upside is good. He's got the 3rd highest strikeout percentage on the slate, but I just don't really, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that he's getting a lot of ownership here when he's more expensive than Zach Wheeler. He's $900 less than Buehler, but he's also, $1,600 more than Dylan Cease, for example, and a lot of other guys in that mid-range that have plenty of upside. So right now it's pretty difficult for me to get to Mahle at this current ownership.
The last time he scored 18 or more DraftKings points was June 16th against the Brewers. And I think that was right around the time that we saw the crackdown on foreign pitcher substances. And ever since then, it's been a couple of things. Not only have we seen a decrease in the spin rate since then, but we've seen him struggle with his walks. So the last handful of starts, last time he only walked one hitter, but the starts for that 4 walks, 3 walks, 4 walks, 4 walks. When that happens, it's just really hard for a pitcher to go more than 5, maybe 6 innings in a start. So we've got a situation where he's allowing more runners to get on base. He's giving up more runs because of lack of control and isn't working deeper into the games. And that's really capped his overall upside as a fantasy pitcher. So I just don't understand why there's this much ownership going to him. The Twins lineup is definitely not what it was now that they traded Nelson Cruz, and it's a team that definitely sold off some pieces at the trade deadline. But just for leverage purposes, I want to be overweight to the Twins just because of all the ownership going to Molly.
Yeah, agreed. And it's a good hitter's park too. Looks like it's supposed to be around 80 degrees in Cincinnati, but this is a park that does play up power. And the thing with Minnesota is even though they definitely have weaker hitters in their lineup, they still have power. Max Kepler has power. Brent Rooker has power. Polanco, Garver. Can you hear my background?
Yes, that's why I started laughing.
All right, talk for a second. I need to shut him up.
Yeah. So listen, with the Twins offense here, it's the guys who actually are kind of capable hitters. They do have power in the lineup. So I know where Adam was going to go with this. Guys like Miguel Sano, Max Kepler, Jorge Polanco, Mitch Garver, Brent Rooker also. These are all guys that are, number one, picking up really low ownership. We've got the most popular hitter on the entire lineup today is Mitch Garver at 3.6% ownership, but he also has catcher eligibility, and he's one of the rare hitters at the catcher position that we could count on for upside. So if we just kind of look at that as a whole, Tyler Mahle picking up way too much ownership. The Twins offense, while not great, if they do find success, it's going to be via home runs. So the kind of leverage they offer there, that's why Adam and I are both going to like them a little bit here. And then on the other side of the game, just as Adam gets back with a shut window, Kenta Maeda is going to be on the mound for Minnesota, pitching in Cincinnati. Now, of the two pitchers in this game, I kind of think Maeda is the better pitcher anyway. And he's getting the benefit of pitching in a National League park where he's going to be facing a pitcher instead of a DH. So that's all well and good for Kenta Maeda. The other thing, too, is the ownership is just not there for him. Only 7% projected ownership. I like the price point on Maeda on both FanDuel and DK. I think he's a good contrarian pitching option today.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a spot where on a lot of slates, he's gotten a lot of ownership, and I've been more willing to get away from him. But here, only getting about 7% ownership, which came up a little bit since this morning. It's a pretty solid Reds lineup, but Maeda is just a pretty good pitcher too. 24.5% strikeout percentage for the season. Has done a pretty good job of striking out hitters from both sides of the plate as well. So I like getting to him as long as the ownership's down. If it comes up between now and lock, I would move away to some other options. But right now, I think it looks pretty good.
By the way, I do like that that since we've done this show together already, I was just kind of able to finish your Twins point from before because I knew where you were going, and I was able to point out the guys who had power upside because it's like, all right, I know exactly why Adam's kind of on here, and it's also, we're on the same page with a lot of stuff anyway. So this is one spot where it's pretty helpful. We've done the show together, and we've talked about some of these spots. And then one other thing to add about Maeda, he really struggled earlier in the season. And he's been much better over the course of his last handful of starts. The matchups have been really easy. He's faced the Tigers in 3 of his last 4 starts. But even so, I think that Maeda is a pitcher. He has a pretty long track record of pitching well. And I think that we could look at his recent results as something of more of a turnaround. The big thing has been uptick in strikeout rate, decrease in walk rate. So Maeda was walking a little bit more guys earlier in the season, but his last handful of starts, 2 walks, no walks, 1 walk, 2 walks, 1 walk. So looks like he has the command under control. I like him relative to his ownership today. All right. Next game on the slate. These are 2 pitchers that neither of us are going to have interest in. Garrett Richards on the mound for the Red Sox. Willie Peralta on the mound for the Tigers. Now, let's start with Garrett Richards because he's a guy who we've talked a whole bunch about how much he's changed pitch grips, changed pitch mixes, tried to introduce that new changeup to try to get something going for him on the mound. There's no way he could continue to be as bad as he's been over the last, 6 weeks or so. But going forward, what do you make of Garrett Richards? And do you think this is a spot where it makes sense to stack the Tigers?
Yeah, I think the Tigers make some sense here just because they're not getting a lot of ownership, but they're certainly not a team that is moving up to the top of the list for me. This is just another start where I'm more interested in just seeing kind of how Garrett Richards looks because he looked pretty good, even though he did give up a few home runs. That first start against Toronto where he had this, 91 mile an hour changeup, he was getting some swings and misses. It seemed a lot less effective the second start. So I don't even know if it's a good pitch or if it's just the Blue Jays had no idea that he had this pitch and it caught them off guard. Now, of course, the Tigers, it's on video. They know that he has this pitch. So not as dangerous an offense as Toronto, but I still on this slate don't really have any reason to get to Richards. I don't love the Tigers. I do think that Robbie Grossman offer some value towards the top of the lineup at their price tags, but on a 15-game slate, I don't really love either side. So it's more of just, what can I learn from what Garrett Richards does in this game that I can take forward to the next slate where maybe he's either viable or whoever he's facing looks a little bit better.
Yeah, 2% projected ownership for the Tigers as a whole, about 2% chance to be a top stack. So there's a bunch of teams that I am looking to be overweight to the field on for that reason we mentioned before, where if there are some teams I'm going to be pretty heavily underweight to the field on, there's going to be a bunch of teams I'm over on. But the Tigers aren't going to be one of them. I don't think the offense is good enough. I understand they had a very hot stretch of hitting during July. I just don't think that's that offense. I think they just had a ton of variance go their way over a course of like a 20-day sample size or something like that. Overall, heading into the season, the Tigers didn't project to be a good offense. Over the course of the season as a whole, they haven't been a great offense. So the Tigers, not really a team that I'm looking to be on. But on the other side of the game, Willie Peralta is going to be on mound for Detroit. He hasn't been bad by any stretch this year, but the Red Sox have one of the best offenses in baseball. So with that in mind, the Red Sox actually do have one of the top positive leverage scores of the day, only 5.4% projected ownership with a 7.6% chance to be a top stack. The Red Sox are a pretty high priority team for me. Which guys are you looking to target?
Yeah, right there with you. Right now, they look like one of the best stacks. They have the highest top stack percentage for any team that is projected to have, to be under-owned, fourth highest overall behind the Yankees, Colorado, and the Giants. So I do think they look good. Willie Peralta was okay in his first, in many of his first starts, I think 4 of his first 5. But nothing about his numbers really suggests he should be any good. He struck out 13.9% of hitters this year. He's walked 9.1%, 4.8 K minus BB percentage is the second worst on this slate behind Zach Davies for anyone that's made, multiple starts this year. 4.95 xFIP, 1.55 home runs per 9. He's had a lot more trouble with left-handed power than right-handed power. I think that's something you probably just see him have trouble with power in general going forward. So I'm not shying away from the righties here, but I do think that guys like Jaron Duran, Rafael Devers, Alex Verdugo have the platoon advantage, but they're also kind of interesting here because, we always think about Boston and think about Fenway Park as being a favorable park for hitting and for home runs. It's a lot easier to hit home runs as a righty in Fenway than it is as a lefty. And then Detroit is a park that had always kind of had a reputation for being a pitcher's park because it was so deep to center field. But this is a park that has one of the best batter's eyes in baseball and has led to, and we've kind of learned it as, as advanced stats have become more prevalent. It gets some of the hardest hit balls of any stadium because you just pick up the ball better. So I think the lefties do get a little bit of a park boost here and also get a good matchup against Peralta.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get away from Boston just looking at the overall ownership numbers that we have on the site. And, Boston has fairly comparable numbers to be a top stack to a team like the Giants. And the Giants ownership is going to come down. The Giants lineup just came across, and it is a terrible lineup that they're fielding today. So that's probably going to come down. But we have the Giants and the Red Sox right now, comparable top stack odds, but the Giants picking up double the ownership. So talking about teams to be underweight to the field on would be like the Giants, the Yankees, and I'd try to direct some of that ownership to the Red Sox paying up for an offense. So right now, Boston does look like one of the top stacks on the slate. Next game that we have here, and this is a pitcher we did not get to talk about earlier in the day. Nick Nyder is going to be on the mound for the Marlins. He's only made a handful of big league appearances. He's a guy who is a prospect in the Marlins organization, and he's pitched a total of like 26 innings so far this year. And I know that before the show started and Jordan was asking me for information on him and what stats spoke on the screen, I was like, listen, there isn't really anything to say about him. He's only been out there a few times, but what do you make of Nick Nyder in this spot against the Mets?
It doesn't seem like it's a great spot for him. I think the only thing really working in his favor is that he's pitching in Miami, but the strikeout numbers haven't really been there. Like you said, he's thrown about 26 innings or 25 innings in the majors this year. He's only struck out 13.4% of hitters. He's actually walked 14.3%. It's pretty difficult to have a higher walk percentage than strikeout percentage, but he's managed to do it. And then even at AAA this year, 18.3% strikeout percentage certainly isn't anything that you're going to get too excited about. I think if you're going to a 4K pitcher, the range of outcomes just is more in favor of Gill on the Yankees because the strikeout stuff has the potential to be so good. He has walk issues, but so does Nick Nyder, and Nyder doesn't have the strikeout stuff to make up for it. So even though I think they project similarly in terms of median projections, I think that there's just a better chance for the Yankees 4K pitcher to do better than the Marlins 4K pitcher.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Also, I think the Mets don't have a bad lineup by any means. Although I'm not sure how much I really want to stack against Nyder with the Mets here, mostly just because of the quality of the park here. It's a pretty strong pitcher's park in Miami. So even the Yankees offense, as good as their offense is, They struggled a little bit to hit in Miami. But talking about the other side of the game, because Taijuan Walker is going to be on the mound for the Mets, and he started the year really, really well, to the point where, I mean, he was kind of in the Cy Young mix, like not actually, except he was a guy, if you went to Sportsbook, it was like, okay, Taijuan Walker's 20 to 1 or something like that to win Cy Young. Not a realistic chance, but he was pitching well enough that before, like DeGrom, Corbin, Burns, guys like that were really going nuts. We had Taijuan Walker kind of being in the mix, but he's regressed in such a big way over the last month. Now his ERA has fallen to 3.71. His expected ERA is at 4.28. He's struggling with his command. And even in recent outings against bad offenses, he pitched 1/3 of an inning against the Pirates and gave up 6 runs. Outing before that against the Pirates, he struck out 2 hitters. He walked 3. So it seems like Taijuan Walker is all out of whack today. He's picking up a little bit of ownership against the Marlins, which I get because of the matchup, but I just can't go there because of how much it seems that he's struggling with, whether it's health or mechanical issues. Something just isn't right with Taijuan Walker.
Yeah, and I think, to what you were saying, he also was just expected not to be bad, but expected to come back down to earth. And if you're overperforming by the amount that he was early in the season, there's a pretty good chance you're just going to hit a couple of rough stretches because you're going to even out at what you are normally. He still looks like he has a little bit of ways to go. Not that guarantees he's going to be bad today, but 4.24 xFIP, like you had mentioned, even the expected ISO numbers for him, they're not bad. 127 expected ISO to lefties, 181 to righties, but they're worse than what he's allowed. He's only allowed a 0.088 actual ISO to lefties, 164 to righties. His expected WOBA to righties is about 13 points lower than his actual to lefties. It's 48 points lower. So still seems like he has some room to continue regressing. And it really just comes down to the ownership here again, because I think that there's obviously a path to success for Walker. He's in a favorable park. He's facing a lineup that wasn't good in the first place and then traded 2 of their better hitters. And overall this season, if you just kind of, look at the full sample of starts, he's been fine, 23.7% strikeout percentage. The issue is just that he's getting ownership because he's facing the Marlins. That's a spot that people typically just kind of flock to. He's projected for 27% ownership on DraftKings. There's plenty of arms around him that I think are essentially the same, similar projections, similar range of outcomes, similar ceilings, all of that. I just don't really see a reason to be getting with the field on Walker when I can be looking to some guys that I think are either a little bit better or at least a little bit lower owned.
Yeah, he's so popular today, and it's just not really warranted, in my opinion. I would feel differently about Walker if it was like, hey, he has a plus matchup. He was good at the beginning of the year. Maybe he could figure it out. And if we were getting them at, 4 or 5% ownership. But right now, he is the second most popular pitcher on DraftKings, only behind Zach Wheeler. And his recent form just really doesn't warrant it at all. His last handful of starts, 10 fantasy points, -7, -14, 1, and 6. So that's all really concerning stuff to me when I look at Taijuan Walker's numbers this year. And could he bounce back? Certainly, but I don't think he's 28% likely to land in the optimal lineup. So I'm looking to go elsewhere at pitcher. And any interest in stacking against him, though, just because he is picking up this much ownership?
I don't think so, just because the slate's so big. It's not only, Miami's such a low probability spot because they are such a bad offense. They have the lowest top stack percentage on the slate. Even if they do some damage and get to Walker, let's say Miami scores 5-6 runs off Taijuan Walker, right? Taijuan Walker is dead, but you're still not winning with Miami because of how big the slate is. If this were a 5 or a 6 game slate, it will be a little bit different because that could get you there. You realistically are still going to need Miami to throw up, 8-9 runs, and that just is not a spot that I'm really looking to get money on.
Fair enough. And next game here, this is my favorite overall spot on the slate. Something we talked about this morning. We were expecting Luis Patino to pick up more ownership as the day has gone on. It just isn't the case. We currently have him projected for 12% ownership on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, he's only 6,800. He's projected for 6% ownership. If this isn't going to change in the next hour and a half, this is my favorite play on the entire slate. I think Luis Patino is a stud. His stuff is ridiculous. Totally shut down the Yankees the last time he was out. I think he's an ace in the making, only 21 years old, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. I don't think anybody could talk me off of Patino at this point.
Yeah, completely agree. And fully stretched out too. We also saw him, kind of work through adversity in that Cleveland start where he didn't end up having a good fantasy output, but Tampa Bay still let him go relatively deep into that game. The strikeout stuff's very good. He's a top prospect. It was good in the minors. He struck out 24.8% so far in the majors. 5.01 xFIP is, not good, but that's a small sample as well. I think that he should be good going forward. You're in a favorable pitcher's park. You're facing a Seattle team that, they can do some damage offensively, but they also have plenty of holes in their lineup that as long as he's on top of his game, he should be able to take advantage of. And most importantly, he's at a price point pretty much by himself. Whereas a lot of these arms that we're talking about, having strikeout upside, but also having some risk, they are 8,300, 8,400, 9K, in Tyler Mahle's case, 10K. Patino's down here at 7,400. There's not really anyone comparable at that price point that has the same sort of strikeout stuff, the same sort of pedigree and upside. So it makes it even easier, I think, to get to Patino.
Yeah, and then on the other side with Yusei Kikuchi, I don't really want to roster him against the Tampa Bay Rays. I think Kikuchi's pretty solid this year. Did make the All-Star game this year. And one thing we've seen from Kikuchi, a difference in him now versus rookie year when he first came over from Japan, his velocity has gone up in a major way. I don't know exactly why it was so low in his rookie year. But anyway, he's turned into himself to be a really quality pitcher in the big leagues at this point. But still, the matchup is tough enough. And also the fact that he has a little bit of salary to him, I'm not really looking to get to him at all. But one thing that does make the Rays at least a little interesting from tournament standpoint, they're projected for 0.6% ownership today on DK. They are totally unowned on FanDuel and DraftKings. Is that enough for you to go back to the well against a team that really burned us in a bad way yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, the ownership's really low, and they do actually have a reasonably high 4.8 implied run total here. I still doubt that I get too much in the way of full Tampa Bay stacks, but I do think they're interesting more so as like one-offs and mini stacks, because even though Kikuchi has been good this year, he has still had issues with power. He's allowed a 186 expected ISO to righties, 175 to lefties. Overall, it has resulted in 1.65 home runs per 9. So even if there's a good chance that he's just going to go out there and give up 2-3 runs, but if, you can get Nelson Cruz or Rosarena, running into one, there's a pretty good chance that you're getting a home run or two against Kikuchi here. So I don't mind full stacking Tampa just because they are getting no ownership and they do have a lot of power in their lineup. They certainly can put up a slate winning score, but I think it's even more appealing to just, kind of mix them in as low owned one-offs with a different full stack.
All right. Next game here. It is the Texas Rangers at home against the Los Angeles Angels, and the pitchers in this game, I don't have any real significant interest. Jordan Lyles is going to be on the mound for Texas. Jose Suarez for the Angels. No, I know earlier in the day, not to say that you really liked Jose Suarez, but you said there's a chance you could see yourself getting to him. One thing, and I thought that was reasonable at the time, one thing that does change for me a little bit here is now if we're really looking to save salary at pitchers, we have a couple of guys who have been introduced in the slate who are flat min, and that kind of makes me feel like Suarez just not somebody who's going to be necessary at all here.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at as well. I had sort of made the case for Lyles and Suarez this morning as just being, cheap options that you could use to get expensive bats into your lineup. But now you get, and like they're still projected higher. Right now we have, Luis between 9 and 10 DraftKings points. Suarez is up at, I think, 12 or 13. And Lyles is at 13.5. So, Suarez at 14.5. So like there is still a gap there. If I can't get an upgrade on hitters between a 4K pitcher and Suarez or Lyles, I still think that they're fine. But having the 4K pitching options to go to does take a little bit of the appeal away, and there wasn't a ton of appeal there anyway.
Yeah, and then as far as offenses go, I'm not really looking to make stacks here. The only thing that's going to be appealing to me is Shohei Ohtani, which I think is pretty par for the course. Just making sure that he's in the lineup today, which, yeah, he is. He's batting second. Shohei Ohtani, whenever you have the room to pay up for a hitter, never have issue with Ohtani. There's basically going to be no slate going forward that he's probably not going to be the top hitter project in terms of most likely to home run. So if you have the space to pay up for Ohtani, go ahead and do that. But I'm not really looking to stack the offenses here.
Yeah, pretty much the same for me. I think that the Angels are going to be a little bit easier to stack than the Rangers if you're going to one side. I do like that the Angels have a little bit more power than normal in the lineup. You have Upton back in the lineup, but you also have Joe Adell in there. We had talked about him a bit this morning. He was briefly in the lineup yesterday and then was like immediately removed like 5 minutes later. But he came up last year and just struck out like 35-40% of the time. He has been tearing up AAA, at least from the quick look I took yesterday. 23 home runs this year at AAA, a 302 ISO, 119 WRC plus. still striking out 29% of the time. So it's not like he's guaranteed to put the ball in play, but you do just get a little bit more power. Now you have, we talked a lot with the Angels this year where it's just like Ohtani, and then if he's healthy, Jared Walsh, and then a huge drop off. Here you do have an Ohtani, Upton, Stassi, Adele kind of four-man that has some power. So maybe a little bit more appealing Angels lineup than we've had at different points this year, but also a much bigger slate. So, tough to really fall in love with them.
Yeah, depending how much you read into some of the prospect reports, you go over to FanGraphs. Joe Adele does have a 70 raw power grade tool over on FanGraphs and their scouting. So I'm not sure. He might actually be considered the number one power prospect in all of the minor leagues right now. Just like you said, the big question is going to be, is he ever going to make contact with the ball? That happens to be the case with a lot of these young power hitting prospects. Sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't. For the price point, I do think there's home run equity there. Not a stack I'm willing to get to, but yeah, I think it makes sense to say that as a one-off, Joe Adele, maybe I undersold a little bit because some of the power upside, I think that could be reasonable to consider him.
Also 8 stolen bases at AAA.
Oh, I didn't even realize that, but yeah. And then even if you look back to him in 2019, obviously there was no minor league numbers in 2020, but also in 2019, he stole 7 bases in the minor league. So a little bit of steal upside there. He seems like he's going to be a guy who could really profile as a boom or bust play, kind of like young Joey Gallo, who basically did nothing but homer and had a little bit of speed on the base pass. So
yeah, I was thinking like Jorge Soler, but with a little bit of speed.
Yeah, just one of those guys who, for tournament purposes, as long as he's cheap and doesn't have ownership, I think throwing him into a few lineups, there's nothing wrong with that. Next game here, Chicago White Sox against the Kansas City Royals. Buehler is going to be on the mound for KC. Dylan Cease on the mound for Chicago. Now, Cease is a pitcher who I've been overweight to in just about all of his starts this year. He's always a guy that seems priced kind of in this mid 8K range where he has strikeout upside and the field typically isn't on him. Today is totally different, though. We currently have Dylan Cease projected for 26% ownership on DK. That makes him the third most popular pitcher of the day behind just Taijuan Walker and Zach Wheeler. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for 13% ownership, making him the fourth most popular pitcher. There haven't been many days where Dylan Cease is chalk, but what do you make of him and his popularity today?
I think that I probably get around the field on him. I don't really see myself jamming over like 25% on Dylan Cease here. But the reason that I do think he looks a little bit better is that he's getting a little bit less ownership than Taijuan Walker, basically the same, but a little bit less at the same price point. He's got the better strikeout percentage. You don't have quite as many concerns about, the way he's pitched recently. He has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate. So I think he looks a little bit better than Walker with ownership being about the same. I think that the fact that Tyler Mahle's getting only a little bit less ownership at $1,600 more, between those two, it makes me think that I end up getting to Cease. So I think that I probably end up in like that 20 to 25% range on Dylan Cease, whereas I end up most likely lower than that on Taijuan Walker and Tyler Mahle.
Yeah, so with Dylan Cease, I do think that if we're looking at some of these more popular pitchers, especially relative to our projections, it makes more sense to get to Cease than some of these other guys. I mean, there's so much ownership going to like Taijuan Walker we mentioned before, but we have Dylan Cease projected for a better chance to be the optimal pitcher. He's a little bit cheaper. He also has slightly less ownership. So from that standpoint, I think he makes a little bit more sense. And then as far as Tyler Mahle goes, we have Dylan Cease and Mahle projected for pretty similar odds of being one of the top two pitchers, but you have to pay $1,600 more to get up to Tyler Mahle. So with that in mind, I think of these three popular pitchers, Cease is the one that makes the most sense. But on the other side, Buehler, who's had his struggles this year, overall for the year, he has had, of course, my browser just closed and all the pages crashed, but okay, here we go. 4.58 ERA, 5.63 expected ERA for Buehler. The other thing, too, that's a knock against from a fantasy standpoint, 18.7% K rate. Chicago White Sox do have one of the more potent offenses in the American League. I think this is a team that I'm willing to get to against Buehler.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is that they just aren't really pulling much ownership right now. They have the sixth highest top stack percentage, only getting about 5% ownership. So the ownership's it's another one of these teams where it's about where it should be. So I don't anticipate getting 20, 25% White Sox stacks, but I do think I end up getting overweight at the expense of these Coors Field teams that are getting a ton of ownership. The White Sox are just a boom or bust offense pretty much. They've certainly hurt us a lot recently, hurt me in particular a lot recently, but it's still, I think, a pretty good spot. Even if you don't think that Buehler is as bad as he was early in his career when he came up originally and then early this year, which I think is a reasonable take because he is one of Kansas City's top pitching prospects, and there is a pretty good chance that he's just, figuring things out. But 199 expected ISO to righties this year, 240 expected ISO to lefties. He's allowed 2.5 home runs per 9 innings. Even if you think he's not that bad, the there's still a long way to go. Like, he can improve quite a bit and still be a pitcher that I want to target against. So that makes me like the White Sox. And then again, you just have power here too. They're expensive, but Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, you have Jimenez in the lineup at 4,300. Moncada, I prefer him left-handed, but still at 4,900. It's just a high upside offense that's not getting a ton of ownership.
We do have a super chat here from Sam Van Dam, who yesterday was asking you for money, and now he's come back. So I guess he was able to find some money because he's got another super chat here. But he's saying, do stacks always have to be in order, or is there an issue with, say, 246, hashtag MLB noob? For me, it's not something I really consider. Just as a general thought, though, the better hitters are typically towards the top of the order. So my priority is going to be rostering the guys at the top, but it doesn't really have much to do with the order the hitters are in. It's just more that the better hitters are at the top of the order.
Yeah, and the closer together they are, they're slightly more correlated, but it kind of gets to a point where you don't want to hone in too much on that kind of stuff. It's more important that you just have guys that are, in the same lineup. Typically, when I'm 5-man stacking, I try not to have a gap of more than like 2. So I might go, like 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, something like that. But as opposed to going like 1, 2, 5, 6, 8 or 9, like it's a little bit better. But like you were saying, the biggest thing is just you don't really want. You're typically, obviously there's some exceptions depending on ownership, but you typically aren't going to want, if a team has 6 really good hitters and then the 3 guys at the bottom are a huge drop off, it's going to be really tough for you to like win a tournament by saying, okay, well, I'll take the 3 really bad hitters on this team and then 2 good ones and go up against all these stacks that have 5 good ones. So it's more so, like you were saying, just quality of the hitters.
Yeah, and the other thing too is a lot of my stacks will, and also it depends on ownership. Not every spot is the same, but also something a lot of my stacks do, particularly if it's a 5-man stack with an expensive offense, there'll be a lot of times where it's like 4 guys towards the top of the order and then 1 guy towards the bottom, just because I need the salary savings somewhere. So that's where I think a lot of my stacks end up being most often, but it's not something I go out of my way or spend like a lot of time thinking about when I'm building lineups. And it's also going to be just depending on individual slates, which guys are lower owned that I want to get exposure to from individual teams. So there's not a one size fits all answer, but overall, it's not something I'm massively concerned about what order the guys are in the lineup. Next game on the slate, the Milwaukee Brewers at home against Pittsburgh Pirates. Adrian Hauser on the mound for Milwaukee, Max Kranick on the mound for Pittsburgh. Kranick has been no good this year, and as a result, we have the Brewers offense picking up a pretty good deal of ownership. The Brewers had a big game last night, and they've been picking up actually, they came down in ownership in the last update. Earlier, they were a team that was really popular. Not as much the case now, so I'm going to have to change gears a little bit here. But I think earlier we had them project for like 8% ownership and just did a refresh only 3.7. But positive matchup for the Brewers against Kranick. So now with lower ownership, I do think it's a good spot.
Yeah, that's definitely a change from this morning. It's a good spot for Milwaukee against Kranick and then against just a weak Pittsburgh bullpen behind them. And the ownership's come down to about where it should be. So you do have some good pricing here. You do have some good hitters. Eduardo Escobar being added to the middle of this lineup gives some more power. Garcia's cheap. Tellez is cheap. Narvaez is pretty cheap. And Adames has played great since going to Milwaukee. So definitely a lot more interested in them now than I was this morning.
Does your dog barking mean he likes or dislikes the Brewers play?
Hopefully likes.
All right. So if your dog's on board, I'm on board too. And the data also bears out the Brewers going a little bit under owned right now. 7.31 ERA for Kranick, 4.74 expected ERA, and just not really the strikeout stuff to get out big league hitters. 18.7% K rate. If you look at his minor league numbers, also not all that impressive. Never considered a real prospect in the Pirates organization. 24 years old at this point. It's a little curious that he's even in the big leagues when you look at his minor league numbers this year in AAA, 5.47 ERA, 4.31 FIP. In AA, 4.02 ERA, 3.52 FIP. So wasn't outstanding in the minor leagues, but the Pirates are bad and just needed bodies at the major league level. So up comes Max Kranick to likely take the loss tonight against the Brewers. On the other side of the mound, Adrian Hauser, quality enough starting pitcher, Pirates bad enough offense. I'm not going to be looking to stack them, but Hauser doesn't work deep enough into games for me to want to roster him in tournaments.
Yeah, same here. And one other thing I wanted to mention with the Brewers, not only has the Pirates bullpen been really bad and given up like a lot of runs late in games, over the last 2 days, they've had 5 of their relievers throw at least 21 pitches in a game. One of them threw 20 plus pitches in back-to-back games. So they have a pretty thin bullpen right now on top of a pretty bad bullpen. So that adds a little bit of upside to Milwaukee as well. But yeah, as far as Hauser, just not a price point I really want to get to. Not enough strikeout stuff, doesn't go deep enough into games. Plenty of other options on the slate that I would consider, but also not really looking to get to the Pirates because they're one of the worst offenses. Hauser is good enough that I don't think the Pirates really stand out. And then also Hauser's not getting ownership. So, you certainly can use the Pirates for low owned value, whether it's Hoy Park leading off at 2K or Ben Gamble hitting clean up at 2,100. There are some cheap bats to go to here. You also have Ke'Bryan Hayes, who actually has some power and upside, but overall, just not a team that I'm looking at.
If you guys want access to all the tools that Adam and I use to build our lineups and all the data that we're talking about as we go through the show, you get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools for nearly every DFS sport out there by getting an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. And if you're new to signing up for Awesemo, you could use the promo code MLB Deeper Dive. That's all one word, all capital letters. That'll get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. And if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, you could get a MLB Plus weekly package for just $15.95. That gets you access to basically everything we have on the site for MLB. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, we've got a handful of games left here to talk about. And the next one, a spot that is interesting to me just because I have no clue why this trade went down, but the St. Louis Cardinals acquired Jon Lester at the trade deadline from the Nationals as the Nationals were just tearing everything apart. Jon Lester has been washed for about 3 years now, pretty consistently over the course of these last 3 years, been a guy with an ERA around 5, expected ERA around 5, is not generating any swing and misses this year, which is a really big concern for him. 14.9% K rate. That's down to a career low. Last year was 15.9%. That was a career low, just his own personal records that he just keeps breaking. So with that in mind, I think this spot for the Braves going up against Jon Lester, I think it's pretty favorable.
Yeah, I absolutely love the spot for the Braves because I think that Lester's washed. I also think this Braves lineup just sets up very, very well against him. They dropped Jock Peterson from 1 to 7. So you have a top 6 of nothing but right-handed power and Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies, Jorge Soler, Freeman, Riley, Dansby Swanson, Adam Duvall. If you go back to the start of the 2019 season and look at those 6 guys against left-handed pitching, Ozzie Albies has a 262 ISO, Soler's at 255. His expected ISO is 311. Freddie Freeman has a 229 expected ISO. Austin Riley's at 247. Dansby Swanson's at 245. And Adam Duvall is at 305. Going up against a pitcher in Lester who's allowed a 194 expected ISO, 234 actual ISO, and has only struck out 14% of right-handed hitters this year. He's held lefties to a 104 ISO, but Freddie Freeman is not your average lefty, so I don't really care. It's just, I think, a really, really high upside offense here for Atlanta. And with the exception of Freeman and to a lesser extent Albies, they're not expensive. Jorge Soler at 3,100, Swanson at 4K, Duvall at 4K, Riley at 4,100. That's a lot of power at very affordable salaries. They are getting some ownership, but compared to some of the other teams at the top, not nearly as much.
Yeah, and like you said, this team made legitimate power acquisitions at the trade deadline. This was an offense that I'd pretty much totally written off after Ronald Acuna got hurt because it just didn't seem like a team that had enough depth of the firepower to really continue to contend this year. But they've added Jock Peterson. They've added Jorge Soler. They've added Adam Duvall. These are all guys that are home run threats. I know it's a negative platoon matchup for Jock Peterson, but he is big power against anybody. And there's a pretty good chance that a right-handed pitcher is going to come into the game at some point anyway. So all of these guys have power upside. Nobody's picking up a whole bunch of ownership here. Jorge Soler is 8.9% projected owned. That is the most popular player in the entire lineup. So the Braves here, this looks like a team that I want to get to. And I think there's a lot of power upside in one-offs. But on the other side of the game, Max Fried is going to be pitching for the Braves. I don't have interest in him. He is a pitcher who's struggled a little bit relative to last year, but still a middle-of-the-road pitcher. He's going up against a very right-hand dominant Cardinals lineup. But Fried is good enough, and there's enough good spots on the slate that I don't really see myself stacking the Cardinals much.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at too. Fried doesn't give up much power to either side of the plate. The biggest issue is that his strikeout numbers drop off by 5.5 to 6 points against right-handed hitters, and the Cardinals have a lot of them. So I don't think it profiles as a great strikeout matchup for Fried. But again, just not compared to a lot of other spots, not really looking to get to the Cardinals. I do think, it's worth mentioning that the price tag on Dylan Carlson's really cheap. The price tag on Tyler O'Neill is really cheap, and those guys do have some power. But overall, there's plenty of cheap bats on the slate in, I think, better spots than facing Max Fried.
Yeah, it's if you look at our top stacks tool, also 1.4% chance for the Cardinals to be the top stack of the day. So very low probability stack. There isn't that much ownership going there, but for good reason. They don't have a very good chance of being a high scoring team. So nothing that really draws interest from me. Now, this next game is one that we're going to have to spend a little bit more time on because it's in Coors Field. It's picking up a whole bunch of ownership. Kyle Freeland on the mound for the Rockies, and then we've got Zach Davies on the mound for the Cubs. Now, the main takeaway from this spot here is just so much ownership going towards it, where we have the Rockies projected for 16% ownership, the Cubs projected for 14% ownership. On a slate of this size, that's just too much ownership for any of these one teams. Also, these offenses are terrible. I get it's Coors Field, but it's not like these are good hitters. It's very much based on the ballpark. That and some of the pricing is unfortunately way too cheap for the Cubs.
Yeah, they're great values. I think most cash lineups are going to be some variation of stacking this game with, like Zach Wheeler and another top pitcher. But for tournaments, it's just the ownership for me. I mean, Coors Field's a good spot, but it doesn't look like it's supposed to be warm today. It's supposed to be rainy. I think right now it looks like the game should be okay, but definitely something to pay attention to. But it's not like this is one of those 95-degree Coors Fields games. It's not like there's many good hitters combined between these two teams. And the pitching, it's not good, but it's not terrible either, especially Kyle Freeland. Zach Davies doesn't miss a lot of bats. He doesn't normally pitch in Coors, so he's someone that I think, probably does get downgraded even more so going into Coors. He has a 5.2 xFIP this year. But Kyle Freeland, on the other hand, he's been making his home starts in Colorado for years. He has a 4.7 xFIP overall. Typically is just a decent pitcher. Not to say that he can't get, blown up in Coors. Anybody can. But it's not like he's not a total garbage pitcher. So I just think the value on these two stacks is great, but it's going to drive the ownership up so much relative to a lot of teams on the slate that are in good spots, not as good as Coors Field necessarily, but just good spots that are much, much more talented hitters. I would rather, this is to me kind of just like the Yankees from yesterday. Both of these teams are in a good spot. Obviously, neither team is as good at hitting as the Yankees, but it's just, if they were low owned, I would gladly play them. But with them getting the ownership, I just think you make more money over the course of a baseball season by not going to a 20+% owned Rockies or Cubs team on a 15-game slate.
Yeah, and the other thing with Kyle Freeland is his results have been better over the last month now. Also, something we talked about in the strategy show in the morning, his recent strength of schedule is brutal. His last 4 starts are Padres, Dodgers, Dodgers, Padres. So those aren't even spots we really expect him to have much success in, but still he managed to score 23 DraftKings points against the Dodgers, against the Padres. He put up 14 DraftKings points. Not anything that's crazy good, but I kind of like the leverage that he offers in tournaments. We have him projected for 0.5% ownership today. Nobody's going to be playing him. Everybody's going to be playing the Cubs in some extent, even if it's not 5-man stacks. There's going to be individual players here in Chicago that are picking up a whole bunch of ownership. So I'm not going to play a ton of Kyle Freeland, but I think I'm going to get to like 8 to 10% of them. Do you think that's crazy, or are you also a little bit on board with that?
I don't think it's crazy because I think from a leverage standpoint, it makes sense. Looking at the projections right now, I doubt that I end up getting it just because Jordan Lyles and Jose Suarez do project a few points higher than Freeland for me. And while median projections aren't everything, they're also going to be low owned. And I just think with the way all my stuff works out, if I go to this price range, I will end up prioritizing those two over Freeland. But I do think that everything you're saying makes sense. The leverage makes a lot of sense. If Freeland pitches well, the Cubs aren't doing well, Freeland's going to be low owned as a result. I don't think it's crazy. I don't think I personally will end up getting much of it, but it does make sense, especially in larger field tournaments where you're competing with, tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, just the way I go about building my lineups and certain bumps I apply to players who I perceive to be in positive leverage spots, that's going to get me to a little bit of Freeland. Like I said, nothing crazy. If you're somebody who plays 1, 3, even 20 lineups, don't play Kyle Freeland. But to me, over the course of 150 lineups, if you're like-minded like us and you're going to be underweight to the field on the Cubs, I think it does make sense to get to some of Kyle Freeland. But some of these Cubs individual hitters, I also think, at least for cash game purposes, it's going to be really hard to avoid the kind of salary savings they offer. So we have to bring up that if you are playing cash games, go and load up on the Cubs, because guys like Rafael Ortega at 2,600, Davey Bodie at 2,700, these are just incorrect prices for guys playing Coors Field. Nobody should ever be this cheap playing in Colorado.
Yeah, without a doubt. And baseball is a weird sport, like to do shows for, because there's such a split between what you should probably be doing in cash games and what you typically should be doing in tournaments. And this is one of those spots. In cash games, you should just be getting a ton of bats from this game because of the pricing. Whereas in tournaments, you're just kind of putting yourself in a really difficult position to try and win if you're going to these teams. But if you're building cash lineups, you shouldn't be avoiding this game. If you do find lineups playing against you in cash that were not heavy on this game, you probably should be trying to get more action against those people going forward, because it's tough these days to find people that are bad at cash games, and those people certainly are. So it's a spot where you should have it in cash, a lot of it, and in tournaments I'll just be going the other way, with the exception of, as you and I talked about this morning, in my lower owned lineups where I have a 1% owned stack or something like that, you still can use these guys for value. They are still in a good spot, and the overall ownership of your lineup is what's most important.
And then we also have to talk about on FanDuel, these teams are more appropriately owned. So we have the Rockies only project for a 10% ownership share on FanDuel. The Cubs only project for a 6% ownership share. The difference is on FanDuel, and it's rare that FanDuel actually does these things correct, so I think we have to give them a little bit of credit here. They actually price these crappy hitters up as if they're playing in Coors Field, whereas DraftKings is like, hey, Rafael Ortega. Oh, by the way, Ortega had 3 home runs the other day, won Adam a whole bunch of money. They just left him at like mid price. Like, hey, it's Rafael Ortega. He's no salary. But over on FanDuel, these players have been priced appropriately. As a result, they just look like neutral plays. There's not any sort of situation here where the Rockies or Cubs are like massively overowned on FanDuel.
Yeah, agreed. And that goes back to the whole point of, especially in tournaments, you're just talking about everything in terms of chances of success versus ownership. So a team can be a team that I'm expecting to stay pretty far away from on DraftKings, and then a team that looks good on FanDuel, as you were just saying.
All right. Next game that we have here, it is going to be Blake Snell on the mound for the Padres. Sean Manaea, we currently have listed as the starting pitcher for Oakland. Right before we started, it wasn't officially announced that he was going to be the starter, just expected. So I just want to double check here as we're talking about it. Have we officially gotten Sean Manaea as the starting pitcher for the A's yet?
Not that I've seen.
All right. So we'll just say expected to be Sean Manaea for the A's on the mound. So assuming he is the starting pitcher, what do you make of him against the Padres today? The Padres obviously have a very strong offense, but I think it's going to be a little weaker than people realize going forward now that Tatis isn't in the mix.
Yeah, I think Manaea is somewhat interesting. We have him with, where is he? Oh, he's not in. We don't have him in the top pitchers tool, but we have him projected to pitch. So I think at 9,400, he's somewhat interesting. It'll depend where the ownership comes in on him, because the matchup still isn't great. But like you were saying, with no Fernando Tatis, this lineup does lose some of its punch. Like when you look towards the bottom of this order now, you get past Will Myers, and then you have a left-handed Hosmer, you have Austin Nola is whatever, left-handed Grisham, Ha-Sung Kim is whatever, and Jake Marisnik's not, he's there for speed and defense. So it's just not as strong a lineup. Tatis missing really, really hurts it. And Manaea has been very, very good recently. Overall this season, he's struck out 27.2% of hitters, only a 5.8% walk percentage. He actually has the second best K-BB percentage on the slate behind Wheeler, 3.39 xFIP. For what it's worth, just carved this team up the last time he faced them. Not that I'm putting any stock into that, but just at least, shows the ceiling that he has. So I do think that, assuming he pitches, 9,400 for Manaea is a pretty good salary. Like, it's the spot that I think I'd rather go to than 10,900 for Buehler. I think I'd rather go there than 10K for Tyler Mahle, especially with Mahle getting some ownership. And I'd rather go there than 8,500 for Walker.
And then on the other side, talking about Blake Snell here, where he still has some name value, so people aren't looking to stack against him. I just don't think he's any good at this point. And could he rediscovered? He still has good stuff, potentially, but he's been so awful for most of the season, and not awful in terms of below expectations for Blake Snell. Because I think there's a lot of times we talk about players being bad. It's kind of overstated in its relative to expectations. We're like, oh, this guy sucks. But it's really like, here's an all-star who's not performing at an all-star level. Blake Snell is a former Cy Young winner who has a 5.44 ERA, a 5.6 expected ERA. The Oakland A's have a good offense. Given the struggles of Blake Snell this year, and literally almost no ownership going to Oakland, we've got 0.8% ownership projection for the A's. There's only a few teams on the slate project for less ownership, and not even significantly. There's only so far down to go from 0.8%. I really like the A's as a contrarian stack.
Yeah, I agree here, because Snell's had issues, and you and I were talking about it this morning. We don't know if he's injured. I think there's a decent chance he is, because we did have that stretch where he like missed the start because he didn't have enough arm strength to throw. And then it was kind of just like, that's the last we heard about it. He came back 5 or 6 days later, and he's just been kind of not very good. He's walked over 14% of hitters this year. That's, clearly not good. The only thing really good that you can point to for Snell is that he has struck out 27.3% of hitters, but he's someone that on a lot of slates recently, it's either been a smaller slate or he's like 7,600. And you can say like, okay, well, I know he has his flaws, but the strikeout stuff is really, really good for that salary. Now, none of that really applies because he's more expensive than pitchers that have the same or better strikeout stuff. The matchup against Oakland is really dangerous, going against a lineup that most likely is only going to have one left-handed hitter. And that left-handed hitter, Matt Olson, has an expected ISO greater than 200 against left-handed pitching since 2019. So it's not an easy out at all. Other than that, you're just going to have a lot of right-handed power, a little bit of speed with Starling Marte added to this lineup as well. And Snell also hasn't been good at holding runners this year. So it's hard to say Oakland is a top stack in terms of, a team that I am likely to get to more than a lot of others. But I do think being overweight on them makes a lot of sense. And I do think that it's a very high upside spot for them against a pitcher in Snell who has really struggled and who they just saw within the last 10 days.
And the other thing with Snell about, if anybody's concerned about any kind of platoon matchups, well, first of all, like you said, they just saw Snell a few days ago. In that start, he pitched 4 innings. He had 1 strikeout, 4 walks, and he gave up 7 runs. So that's pretty pitiful. The other thing, too, if anybody's concerned about Matt Olson, left, based on everything we've seen about Snell this year, he's not going to be in the game for very long. He is very rarely going deeper than even 4 innings. So his last handful of starts, 4 innings, 6 innings, 4 innings, 4 innings, 5 innings, 3 1/3 innings, 4 innings. And some of those starts where he's gone for, like the last one against Oakland, the game was over. Like there was no reason to leave him in other than we need somebody to eat innings. We don't want to kill the bullpen. We've already lost this game. Blake Snell, you suck today. You're going to eat the innings today. So he's struggled mightily and he's not working deep into games. Matt Olson's going to be facing a right-handed pitcher at some point in this game. So Oakland, the 0.8% ownership is just too low.
And also for what it's worth, since 2019, Matt Olson has the highest ISO on the team against left-handed pitching in 400 plate appearances.
That too. And Matt Olson's just good. Regardless whether it's lefty or righty, Matt Olson has a ton of power upside and is going to be among the league leaders in home runs this year. 2 games left to talk about. And the next one here, Madison Bumgarner on the mound for Arizona going up against his former team, the San Francisco Giants. Now, Madison Bumgarner, for my money, has one of the worst contracts in all of baseball. Got signed to a massive deal by the Diamondbacks prior to last season. It was something in the neighborhood of 5 years, $100 million or something like that. And he returned the favor by last year going out and pitching with a 6.48 ERA, 7.79 expected ERA. He's been a little bit better this year, but that's not really saying much. Still a 4.87 ERA, 4.28 expected ERA. But the big thing here with Madison Bumgarner and the Giants is the Giants offense has become really popular on a lot of these slates as of late. And it's gotten to the point where, number one, it's too much ownership going to them. And number two, did you see what the Giants lineup is today?
Yeah, it's not very good. But at the same time, it's just one of those, somehow all of these no-name guys on the Giants are still above average hitters.
And one thing also is they do have guys who, as one-offs, have the potential to hit left-handed pitching, be Austin Slater, Darren Ruff, Wilmer Flores, Donovan Solano. Here's one thing you brought up this morning that I also have a concern with in terms of 5-man Giant stacks. Number one, they are going over-owned. But then number two, there's a lot of pinch hit risk here. If Madison Bumgarner struggles and only goes 3 or 4 innings, if they bring a right-handed pitcher behind him, there's a good chance that guys like Darren Ruff and Austin Slater are not going to be in the lineup past the 4th or 5th inning.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern. So I'm looking, this is since the start of 2020 and not exclusive to left-handed pitching, just in general. The only hitter in this lineup that has been below average in terms of WRC plus is Thairo Estrada at 98. Everyone else has been an above average hitter overall. Even guys, Darren Ruff has a 152 WRC plus with a 274 ISO. Slater's got a 110 WRC plus, 180 ISO. But like you were saying, it wouldn't be surprising at all at some point to see Austin Slater pinch hit for. It wouldn't be surprising. He's the one that really stands out. I assume Yastrzemski just hits for him at some point. But you also have Alex Dickerson on the bench. You have Brandon Crawford on the bench. You have very, very good hitting left-handed bats on the bench to start this game for the Giants. I think that, situations will probably dictate what happens, but there's a lot of risk in different parts of this lineup, whether it's Slater, to a lesser extent Ruff, but also Solano, Estrada. even Duggar, even though he's a lefty, but where if they're up, like, you're sweating this game in like the 6th inning and it's into the bullpen and you're like, oh my guy's coming up with 2nd and 3rd, 1 out. Suddenly Mike Yastrzemski's coming up with 2nd and 3rd and 1 out and not your guy. So I do still think it's a high upside spot for the Giants because you can't necessarily pinpoint exactly who does get pinch hit for, but they have a lot of options they can go to here to really screw up your stack in the later innings.
Yeah, more than once I've had Giant stacks. That one that really sticks in my mind, I remember this was probably like, there's certain spots that you just remember forever playing DFS where you just have a bad beat that never goes away. I had a Giant stack last summer where they had scored, it was like 9 runs through 2 innings. And they had, I'm pretty sure it was Darren Ruff who was coming up. It was in the 2nd inning, bases loaded, nobody out. They pinch hit for him in the 2nd inning after the pitcher came out of the game. And that's like the worst way for a high scoring stack that was low under the time to lose. So that's something that always does stick in my mind a little bit when it comes to the Giants. Obviously, it's a good spot for them against Madison Bumgarner, but there are risks to play, and it's a lot of ownership going to San Francisco. I'm a little curious to see if that ownership comes down after the lineup settles in a little bit, just because so many of the regulars that are in the lineup are out today. So we'll see where that comes. But as of right now, they do look like they're pretty overowned. Final game here on the slate. And Walker Buehler is going to be on the mound for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, Walker Buehler, I don't love the spot for him against Houston. He's also pretty expensive, something we mentioned earlier today. Walker Buehler does not warrant being this much more expensive than Zach Wheeler on this slate. We've got Walker Buehler $400 more expensive on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's $1,200 more expensive. And somebody who in Zach Wheeler in our projections, we have project for quite a bit more fantasy points than Walker Buehler. He's also a much safer play going up against Washington. But if you want to pay up to be contrarian, I do kind of like the spot for Walker Buehler just for that purpose.
Yeah, I think basically the way I view it is if I just happen to have a couple of cheap stacks, it makes sense in some spots to just be contrarian and pay up for Buehler. The issue that I have, though, is he just doesn't project as good for me as a few of these other guys. And, again, median projections aren't everything. But, for example, if I have a low-owned stack and I could say, okay, well, I'm going to use a couple of other cheap hitters and Walker Buehler, or I'm going to pay for a hitter I really want and Zach Wheeler, I'm probably just going to go that route, assuming that the stack that I have is low-owned. So I think I probably get around the field, maybe a little bit less on Buehler. It's just not a spot that I'm going to find it very easy to get to. But if that's a spot where you wanted to take a stand, I say it a lot, there's especially on these bigger slates, there's a lot of low enough owned pitching where you can look at it and say, yeah, that's probably a profitable play without it being like the most profitable play. I think if in whatever lineup you're building, if you choose to say, well, I want to pay more for Walker Buehler than Zach Wheeler, because I don't think Zach Wheeler is going to beat Walker Buehler 4.5, times, that's fine. Like he shouldn't be 4.5 times as owned as Buehler. That's fine. But I think there's probably just better spots that you can find.
By the way, circling back on something from the last game, it does seem Sean Manaea was confirmed as the starting pitcher just shortly before we were starting talking about that game. So Sean Manaea is going to be in there, and I'm going to refresh the top pitchers tool just to see if the data is updated with him in there, because if it is, which it isn't, I was going to say we could read off some of that data right before the show ends, but still a few minutes left here. On the other side of the game, Lance McCullers is going to be on the mound for Houston. The matchup against the Dodgers is absolutely brutal, so I don't really ever like to roster pitchers going up against the Dodgers just because of all the firepower and the offense. Obviously, it's not the full strength Dodgers offense because we're still waiting for Trey Turner to be in there and whatnot, but overall, I don't like rostering pitchers against the Dodgers. But are you looking to potentially get to Los Angeles just because this is a lower-owned spot, even though McCullers is a good starting pitcher?
I think it's okay, but right now the Dodgers are actually getting basically the ownership that they deserve. I'm never really opposed to stacking the Dodgers when they're 2% owned, especially now you have Mookie Betts back as well. You have Corey Seager back. So the lineup's deeper. It's more dangerous, even though it's not completely at full strength yet. And McCullers does walk a lot of guys. He can certainly get himself taken out of the game pretty early, but there's just enough weak pitching on this slate, enough low owned spots that I like. I don't anticipate getting to a whole lot of Dodgers here. I don't anticipate getting the McCullers either. I had, mentioned this morning that you can certainly make the case anytime McCullers is 1 to 2% owned to roster a pitcher that has his talent level. But there's just, again, there's so many pitchers today that because what really matters is the total ownership of my entire lineup. I'm not just trying to find every 1% owned play that has some chance of success. I just doubt that I really end up getting to McCullers, especially now that we also have a $9,400 Manaea to pull some ownership in there.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something we could close with here because Brett Narlock in the YouTube chat asked, Manaea is projected for no ownership at this point in time. That will change. Who will he take it away from? To me, I don't think he's going to be all that popular. So my assumption is going to be it doesn't change the ownership in a massive way. It'll be from some of the expensive starting pitchers. So maybe it comes from Cease a little bit. Maybe it comes from Walker because Walker already project for 27% ownership. I think that could come down. But do you think that Manaea is going to be popular today?
I would guess like 15 to 20% ish. And I think it does come from some combination primarily of Cease, Walker, Mahle. The guy's kind of in that price range where I think you just kind of see that ownership like level out basically. Or at least I think that's what should happen.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for Adam and I on the deeper dive today, but don't go anywhere. MLB Live Before Lock is coming up next. Also, do those guys a favor, like the video so they go into it feeling good about themselves. Also, while you're there, subscribe to the YouTube channel.
on to your butts.
Yeah, that's right. What's going on, everybody? I'm happy to be back in an odd way here with Eric Lindquist. I'm Dave Loughran, taking it till 7:05 Eastern with Eric on MLB Live Before Lock. It's been a minute since I've done an MLB show. If you're wondering why, probably not, but I'll tell you anyway, because I've been over at the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel, churning out the best fantasy football content you're going to find on the YouTube. So check that out while we're at it. A little self-promotion there, but I promise you'll love it. Fantasy football is right around the corner. Ben and I already did a DFS NFL thing this week, yesterday, as a matter of fact, Eric, and we're almost there.
Yeah, we're almost there. It was really fun to watch going through a lot of the week one builds. going to be some crazy pricing that exists just because of injuries that have already happened, injuries that will happen. And now is the time that you want to start putting in some of the work there, whether it's in season long that's coming up here, best ball drafts going on all the time as well. I mean, football really never stops. It's the machine that keeps on going, but good to have you in the MLB streets. How do you feel? Does it feel a little weird?
They feel, yeah. I mean, in a sense, I feel like I've abandoned those streets and now I come back, hopefully with open arms. But yeah, I don't know. Appreciate all the comments too in chat about the Fantasy Football channel. Subscribe to that. And hey, while you're at it, hit that thumbs up for us right here and subscribe to this channel. My hope was that we'd hit 60K by football season, but it was a pipe dream because baseball and golf are the only sports happening right now. You know what I mean? But I think once NFL comes around, just rocket ship takes off. And
there's a solution. You just cover all of the things. So, for me, it's like you just jump from one thing to the next. And
right.
I guess I was going to say, you're a 24/7 football guy now. It just kind of is what it is. And you've earned the right to do exactly what you want to do.
Thanks. It's been long enough, man. Look, I
had to just suck up to you on the front end here before I go off the rails again, like yesterday. What Disney character where Eric Lindquist beat a game? Beat a game.
After the show,
that was a Freudian slip. Oh man, wowzer. Man, Tinkerquist never gonna get old. I meant to say, I don't even know what I meant to say. I'd have to go back and play it back, but yeah, all right. That was something.
Well, after the show, you're going to make. So, Loughy, I'd love to start doing some more NFL content if you don't mind. You heard those things I said about you at the beginning of the show, right?
Yeah.
But for real, we're happy to have you guys with us. I mean, I had to come back on a 15 gamer or whatever it is. What do we have? 15, right? 15 game slate. Just absurd. The amount of games we have on a Tuesday and a Friday. Nolan couldn't schedule me for a Wednesday, but that's okay. Because Eric Lindquist gives great analysis. I'm going to do my best to steer this ship back in the MLB world. And we'll kick it off with this. I have a strategy question for you before we get into any of the top stacks, top pitchers. We'll get into the home run picks of the day. Take your questions, of course. And if you are an Awesemo member, we'll get to those first, along with everybody in Slack. But when it comes to these 15-game slates and ownership is usually spread out enough, or at least, you're talking about top stacks. There's no real clear-cut top stack percentage, like probability of being a top stack in our top stack tool. The highest is 8% today. And then it's basically just flat all the way down. Ownership. Yeah, there's some relatively high owned teams as far as stacks go. And then, as we all know, Coors Field is something that will do that to you, no matter how big the slate is. But pitching as well, you got Zach Wheeler getting a lot of ownership. The question is, though, if you have really chalky pitchers on a 15-game slate where you have 29 other arms to choose from, and when you have a really chalky team and you have a ton of other teams to choose from, how do you go about that? Will you ever just eat that chalk because you like them so much? Or do you look to get a little bit different here? Because usually you don't get super high ownership on these massive slates where everything's spread out.
It depends on the field size. Like for me, it comes down to how many entries are there in the tournament. So we have some GPPs over on DraftKings and FanDuel that are 40,000 plus entries. The $11 here that I'm in, where it's 32,000 people that you're basically, or 32,000 entries that you're going up against. You can't play brick and mortar, especially on this kind of a slate where the way I look at it is if you just remove the 3 highest owned pitchers off the board, does it really do that much for you as opposed to getting the different stacks? Because like for me, the stacks are kind of it, especially today, where you look at the Yankees, they're coming in with a ton of ownership, rightfully so, Colorado and Chicago. So you have those 3. If you write those 3 off the board, you have 27 other teams to pick and choose from. There are some really low owned teams amongst them with a lot of upside, with a lot of power bats. Not just that, but like just kind of work a little bit better to be able to fit some of the more expensive pitching. So I try not to go a little bit too crazy about it. Pitching, you try to just target some of the best plays. And of course, there are some leverage spots. And there's one guy, obviously, in Luis Patino that I'm shocked at what his ownership is here right now, because he seems like a guy that you just want to get to an absolute ton of. He's at a price point that just makes everything else work. And so considering he's already lower owned than I would expect, it becomes an easy thing for me to not worry about it too much because I have one guy that already isn't getting a ton of ownership. If I were just making Wheeler and Buehler over and over again, maybe not Buehler, sorry, Molly specifically, Wheeler and Molly, where they're kind of pulling more ownership. Dylan Cease is getting a ton, and I always love playing this dude. But yeah, I've already got a guy that's around 11%. I think that that's good enough in some of these large fields because I'm differentiating so much with my stacks.
Good stuff. So let's talk about the highest owned pitcher on the slate right now, specifically on DraftKings. Of course, 2-pitcher site, a lot different than a single pitcher site like FanDuel. But Zach Wheeler at 9,700 is pulling north of 45% ownership right now. That's pretty much double the next closest pitcher, give or take, right? Take, actually. But it's interesting to me about this matchup, and I want to talk about Philly on the other side when we get to bats as well against Corbin, who's allowed like the 4th most home runs in the league this season and has just been bombed for multiple home run games on numerous occasions. You've got a total of 8. The Phillies are minus 170 here. They've taken the first 2 games. But what's interesting about Wheeler, and maybe you can speak to this, is this matchup against Washington. While they're not a good team, they're a sub 500 club against right-handers this season. They're 26th in K rate. And we can obviously talk about what lineup they're running out there today as well, because that can make a difference. 14th in WRC plus, and isolated slugging, they're middle of the league as well. So it's not exactly just a straight baller matchup, but is there anything about this, obviously no Trey Turner, that makes it a much better matchup aside from that?
Well, it's just watered down with no Turner in there. Obviously, they've moved a number of pieces here now. They're sellers at the deadline, and now you're looking at a lineup of Stevenson, Sanchez, smashed between Soto and Bell. Like, for me, if Wheeler's going to have any issues, I think playing the 2-man Soto-Bell in a massively large field seems like a good way to go. I know Yadiel Hernandez had a couple homers, and he's been all right, but man, for me, it's just such a watered down team, and they don't K a crazy amount outside of Trace Barrera sitting there at 20%. Well, not even that. I was going to say there's really nobody outside of Stevenson, I guess, leading off 31%. But it's Zach Wheeler up against a team that's just kind of devoid, and Wheeler gets it done in a number of ways, and he's priced at just an egregious place. So 9,700, he limits hard contact, 29.5% hard hit percentage, 297 expected slugging on the season. So I don't even necessarily need him to rack up 10, 11, 12 Ks in this spot. Like, there's an opportunity for him to go 7, 8, not saying complete game, but whatsoever. That's a weird thing to throw out there, but there is massive upside because Wheeler can get it done in so many different ways. It's not just K dependent. So I think that we're pretty solid with him being above and away one of the best pieces. It's hard to imagine that you're going to see 4 or 5 pitchers on this slate go out and beat him. And I know the top pitcher percentage has him right around 25% now. That's been slowly climbing up here throughout the day. He started around 20, and now even at 25, you're looking at one of every 4 slates where this guy is going to end up as one of the top 2 pitchers. That sounds about right, but it's going to be very rare that he's going to fall outside of the top 5. And I think if you're getting different enough with your stacks like you should be on this slate, playing him is no problem.
Sure. And another thing about Wheeler that stands out, it kind of speaks to what you're saying, is he pitches deep into games. He's averaging 6 2/3 innings per start this season, which is a really, really high mark. So is he the type of guy that can get there without racking up a ton of Ks? Yeah, I certainly think he can. And you're not wrong. Like, this is a very watered down lineup, very low implied total at 3.5 runs for Washington. It does make sense. I was more so speaking to the fact that his ownership is really high for a 15 gamer. The guy coming in beneath him, and if you are a member of Awesemo, feel free to follow along with the Awesemo, where I'm looking at ownership, the top stack tool, the top pitchers tool. What do we have free today? We got anything free today? Where's our free stuff? Where's our free shit? Did this come off the, did someone take this up?
$3.99.
Jordan, what's free today? We'll figure that. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Glad I asked. MLB main slate ownership free at awesemo.com today. We'll be taking a look at that as well. Taijuan Walker got off to a strong start on the season, but things have really not looked particularly great lately. He's allowed 16 earned over his last 3 starts. He didn't make it out of the first inning. God, he didn't make it past 1. He pitched to 1 out a few starts ago, and that was it at PNC Park against the Pirates. And then Toronto, he could only get through 4, got through 5 against Atlanta, but he's been tuned up a lot. He's allowed 5 home runs over his last 2 games. Excuse me. And a bunch of these starts, just zero swing and miss stuff, no strikeouts. I don't know where you stand on him, but is this one of those spots where you're happy to come in under the field on Taijuan Walker? Because he's pulling about 27% right now against, of course, not a good Miami team, but one or the other has to win out here, obviously.
Yeah, I'm definitely down on him for sure. It's a pitcher that I think he was just kind of pitching a little bit above his head as well. And that definitely is something that I'm factoring in. It's just not somebody that arm talent wise, we kind of expected this to be happening for him with the Mets. And of course, this is as good of a matchup as you can possibly get. I just got done talking about McGill, which that could not have possibly gone worse. But Taijuan Walker on the season, 23.7% K percentage, 399 expected slugging. I know that this is, again, a terrible, terrible Marlins team, but it doesn't take much here. It's hard for me to want to be paying the number that we're going to have to for him, even at 8,500, when I have somebody like Patino down there at 7,400. You really got to get some of those strikeouts to kind of show up for him. And looking at the top pitcher percentage, I mean, we've got Patino with a better chance of being a top 2 pitcher on this slate. It's hard for me to imagine that Walker is still, even against this Marlins team, going to rack up enough strikeouts to be one of the top 3, 4, 5 guys that you really need here on this slate. I would rather take some shots a little bit cheaper, even on a Max Fried or somebody that we can at least see that K percentage get up closer to kind of what you're looking for a tournament. But yeah, there's a little bit of security just from that Marlins lineup. I just don't really play Walker very much ever. He's not a pitcher that really interests me that much. And yeah, great ballpark, great matchup, but I think there are more Ks available elsewhere.
Are there more available for Dylan Cease? Because Kansas City, if there's one thing if there's one thing they've been capable of doing for years, despite not being particularly good on the offensive end, and they only have a 3.5 run total today, the one thing they've been good at doing is putting the ball in play. And that might not always be the case depending on the lineup, but they've done a relatively decent job of putting the ball in play. They have a bottom 5 K rate on the season. They're just not good is the thing. I mean, 86 WRC plus is one of the lowest marks in the league, Eric. As a matter of fact, I think it's bottom 4 in the league, tied with the Pittsburgh Pirates against right-handers. So Dylan Cease pulling very similar ownership to Taijuan Walker and almost the identical price to him as well. Only $100 less expensive on DraftKings. If you were to go over to FanDuel, you're looking at Dylan Cease 8,300, getting around 12% ownership, one of the higher owned pitchers. But where do you stand on him today in a home matchup against the Royals?
Yeah, I'm a Dylan Cease mark, and I'm kind of a mark for this entire team outside of Keuchel for the starting rotation. There's just guys that tend to get it done with the strikeouts. And again, red across the board over on Baseball Savant, just a guy that sticks out like a sore thumb in doing things well across the board. Dylan Cease for the season. Yeah, he can give up a little bit. He's more of a fly ball pitcher, 17.4 degree launch angle here, but limits the hard contact to around 35%. A 220 batting average, not letting guys on base. If he's not walking dudes, 9.3% walk percentage, which is kind of the danger you run into. But there's no Mondesi, obviously, he's been out forever here. So less stolen base upside that exists here. I just think Dylan Cease is a pretty reliable play here on this slate. Another guy that's just a massive part of my portfolio. And, between him and the rest of this White Sox pitching staff, just a team to be really high on here as we're closing out the season.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, he's got just shy of a 30% strikeout rate on the season. You're looking for someone that can give you that upside. And it just feels like, it feels like Cease should not be the same ownership as Taijuan Walker, right? Like,
No.
I understand that matchups play a big role in this, but you would really think that, what do you think ownership should be at for Walker today? How much do you have?
Oh, I have next to none. I think I had like 6% in my last run. I'm always massively underweight to him. That did not go well at the beginning of the season, that's for sure. But it's definitely come back around here. Let me pull up exactly the kind of the 2 for 2 here, because looking at the Royals lineup here on the season, they only K against righties 22.2% of the time. But they have a shocking WRC plus compared to what you would expect. 86 WRC plus. It's tied for 4th worst in baseball against right-handed pitching. So I don't know. It feels like another secure spot here. And then Dylan Cease just brings the strikeout upside just with himself. The arm talent, 29.3% K percentage on the season. There's a number of bats here that are going to strike out at an above average rate. in the lineup here, whether it's Taylor, Dozier, Sal Perez, all north of 25%. You've got Witt and Nicky Lopez. They just don't strike out whatsoever. But the other guys, it feels like this is another secure spot. I mean, Cease and Wheeler and getting different with your stacks feels like such a better route, and putting Patino into that grouping too. I have 27% Dylan Cease here in my 80 lineups that I have going. And I've got how much Walker? 7%. So a little bit more than I expected. I expect that that's going to go down here, especially as we get the next run here with Sean Manaea that got added to the pool. I'm curious to kind of see where he ends up landing at. I'm not super high on playing Manaea ever, but I think the ownership could come in a lot lower than we expect because of the late news on it.
What about Tyler Mahle? I know Adam and Greg, who were on the deeper dive prior to this show, I had talked quite a bit about him. And we obviously know that the whole crackdown on foreign substances thing has played a significant role, or at least presumably played a significant role in spin rate and just overall ability to get Ks. With Tyler Mahle, it's kind of interesting to me. I just looked up his numbers now, and I assume that you'd see maybe a lower swinging strike rate, swing and miss stuff, and such since that crackdown. But he actually has a 2% higher swinging strike rate since that foreign substance crackdown. It's just, as far as fantasy points go, he's not pitching particularly deep into games. It's not even that he's been terrible, but I mean, 10K on DraftKings just seems egregious. On FanDuel, though, Mahle is the highest projected owned pitcher right now, coming in around 19.6%.
Well, he's got the four-seamer spins right just short of 2,400 RPMs, and then the slider comes in around 2,550. So, like, he's still getting some good spin on it. Both those pitches, his four-seamer actually has a whiff percentage around 30%. That's a pretty good number to be looking at. For me with Mahle, it just comes down to the boom-bust potential that exists at his ownership here. And I feel like the bust is just much higher than what people are accounting for. I think the guys on the show previously had alluded to it a little bit more, so I don't want to take credit for it. But other than the Cubs game where he ended up putting up 17.3, there only one walk. He has games of 4, 3, 4, and 4 walks in his last grouping. The underrated talking point of the whole sticky substance situation is that it affects control too. It can affect your grip on the ball. It can affect some of the things you're doing that aren't necessarily just directly spin related. Talking about Garrett Cole having to change the grip of his pitches. Glass now ends up getting he's going to have to do surgery and be out for the entire season after an unbelievable beginning of the year because he had to just change the gripping on things. It didn't affect the pitch in particular, but the same spin rates for him, but it just ended up causing issues with his control. So that for me is kind of the concerning spot going up against a Minnesota team that, again, you want to talk about watered down. They're definitely no Nelson Cruz in there is a big piece, but still got enough guys that I think can do a little bit of damage. And it's a huge ballpark upgrade anytime any team goes into Great American. Not that Target Field's the absolute worst, but it's not as great as Great American Ballpark for sure. This seems like a little bit more of a freaky spot for Mahle, especially at his ownership. Minnesota makes sense as a really good leverage stack, and Mahle's going to be a little bit lower in my portfolio as well.
You know, it's funny you talk about the inability potentially as a result to command or control your pitches. Guess who ranks among qualified pitchers dead last in pitches per plate appearance?
Oh, God. I mean, has it got to be Tyler Mahle?
Tyler Mahle.
Start with that. Look at this. I can take cues. This is great.
Yeah, that was good, man. I mean, I definitely didn't provide you with much, but yeah, that's not good when you're looking at some of these, and it just speaks to what you're saying. Dude's going 5 innings with 100+ pitches. A lot. You know, he's throwing a lot of pitches, and that's one of the reasons, because when you look at the game logs and you look at the strikeout stuff, the swinging strike rate, all that, it's not that bad. It's just not all of the pieces of the puzzle have come together for Mahle since June 16th, when he had that huge performance with 38 or 35 DraftKings points against Milwaukee. But the reason I asked you is there's a huge discrepancy in price from DraftKings, where he's in the 10K plus range, to FanDuel, where he's in the 7K range. His internet sucks today.
Yeah, agreed. And there's a massive difference between playing on the sites. My internet sucks right now.
Yeah,
it was being spotty yesterday too. I'm plugged into the freaking thing.
It's all right.
I just want to. Oh, I'm hardwired. This is absurd.
We'll get through it. Don't worry. We're good.
Okay. Well, as if it gets ridiculous, I'll leave and come on back. I was going to say, you just had some experience with that with Ben Rasa, I believe. So on the NFL
Jordan's
show, the guy just
Jordan's
ditched
computer
you
froze
out.
up today. At the end of our fantasy football show, Jordan's computer just froze up. The stream dropped. We were at the end, but yeah, it's been a tough couple of days over here. Go ahead, Ben.
Oh. Did EMAC just make a Frozen joke in the chat? He did. What a jerk face. Low hanging fruit, my guy. Let's see if it cuts out here. Let me just jump back in here later. But if it keeps being this, at least we can maybe get through it. I'm thinking, just looking at some of the stuff with Molly comparatively, I don't even know what the question was anymore. I just got completely derailed.
I was just saying how big, if you're playing DraftKings and FanDuel, right? Like, how big of a difference is it for you that he's in the 7K on DraftKings or FanDuel and 10K plus on DraftKings is what I was saying. Like, can you ignore some of the bad with that salary?
Oh, gigantic difference. Yeah, because it just changes the entire roster construction, the things that you're able to do, whereas you basically are cost prohibitive at 10K over on DK. There are certain stacks that just will not work. There's certain combinations that just can't happen when you have a 10K salary, especially if you're wanting to play Wheeler with him at 9,700. It limits your ability to get different. Whereas going over to FanDuel, looking at the pitcher pool up and down that entire line there, like, it just gives you the freedom to be able to play who you want. And you can leave salary on the table and play the exact same stacks that you would before, just getting different in that one spot. I mean, he is the most underpriced dude at 7,900 on that entire slate. I'm much more inclined to be playing more of him over there. I'm not playing FanDuel today, but I have a couple lineups just to have, for the sake of talking. Him and Dylan Cease. I mean, they're kind of 1-2 there at 8,300 and 7,900, but yeah, the Molly play just opens up so much freedom in your lineup that playing a Walker Buehler, like if you're not playing Wheeler at 10-7, which again, that limits you even further, going down to Molly makes a lot of sense over there. Whereas on DK, I just think because he's still getting the ownership that exists there, I'm more inclined to kind of hit eject and take the stack on the other side.
Let's talk about your guy, Luis Patino. I know you like him a lot today. And it makes sense, especially at that price point. Not only at the price point, but I would factor in the ownership as well. I know it's just a bit surprising, but that's what we're here to talk about. So 7,400 on DraftKings. He's sub 7K on FanDuel. Only projected for around 11.5% ownership on DraftKings. Again, ownership, main slate ownership is free today over at Awesemo.com. If you want to get access to everything else, the top pitchers tool, the top stacks tool, all of this stuff, projections, ownership, all of our top this tool, boom or bust tool, optimal lineups, lineup builder, all of these tools that have helped a lot of people win a lot of money. And you'll see that in the Hall of Fame segment in a little bit. All of them over at Awesemo.com, not just for baseball, but for basketball when it's back, for NFL right around the corner, MMA, UFC. Our NFL top stack tool was a game changer last year. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
You name it, all of the sports. The League of Legends, esports, we got you covered on all of this. Go to awesemo.com/join if you want to see what we got, whether it's a weekly express pass for less than $5 or it's a monthly all access, all sport or single sport for the year, for the month. You want to make a real investment, you go all out. Everything for the year, get every sport. It doesn't matter what you want to do. We got something for all of you, no matter what your budget or how serious or not serious of a player you are. Maybe you're a casual, but you still want to have an edge. That's what we got. That's what we got you covered for, no matter what. Awesemo.com/join and check that out today. All right. And by the way, all these tools created, built, and used by the #1 ranked DFS player, Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. Also Caruso, because the resemblance is wild. And now he's got him in Chicago. He's got to be stoked. But yeah, he's won a lot of money using these tools. And I figured I'd mention that because it's probably pretty important and might make you a little bit more confident to check these out. And I think you'll like them a lot. And last thing, if you do sign up, join our premium Slack chat. Great community channels for all different sports, and the premium office hours where you got the pros over at Awesemo hopping in each day, random people jumping in, answering your questions, taking time to help you better your game. So go to awesemo.com/join. And if you have questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm happy to help you figure all of that out. All right, let's talk about your boy Patino. He hasn't pitched, a ton at the major league level, right? He's made 6 starts this season. And then last year with San Diego, he made what? I think 1 start and 11 appearances. He's pitched about 49 total innings. But as far as K rate goes and all of these numbers, there's really very little reason that he should be priced here. And I'm assuming particularly against Seattle in a pitcher-friendly Tropicana field, you're feeling pretty good about Patino today.
Yeah, it's hard not to. I mean, the kid's 21. He was the prize piece of that trade that brought Blake Snell. I bet they would want to do that one over again if you're San Diego. That would probably be the better spot. His fastball, 65 grade over on FanGraphs as well. I mean, the guy is a prospect. He's definitely going to be the guy that I think going forward for this Tampa Bay team ends up being their ace, especially with Glass now out. And I know that seems like a large statement to make. They have a number of decent pitchers there, McClanahan and other pieces, but the ability that he has to get swings and misses, looking at some of his AAA numbers too, a 2.78 FIP, a 3.33 xFIP, he's going to be limiting some of this hard contact, I think, going forward. You want to be early to the party on guys like this at 7,400. They make your lineups so much easier to make, and we're getting reduced ownership on them because maybe the field just isn't as familiar with him or what this upside could be. And then you get Seattle on the other side. And Seattle, I would say, by all intents and purposes, has overachieved as a lineup this season. But outside of Haniger and Seager, there is not a lot of pop. Nobody else over a 402 expected slugging here on the season, Ty France being the third in that order. It just sets up to be a place where I think he can both survive as by accumulating strikeouts. A number of guys in that lineup for Seattle, only JP Crawford and Ty France and Abraham Toro underneath 23.6% strikeout percentages. That's 6 swings and miss guys that he's going to get in this lineup as well. It sets up so well for me. I'm very surprised by his ownership, but you can tell that Awesemo loves him too. Looking at our top pitchers tool, 14.4% top 2 pitcher percentage, and the ownership keeps crawling on down over on DK, down to 10.7% here
just
now.
Updated 10 minutes ago, by the way.
Oh my God. It's going to be such a good spot. I think a tiny bit of that ownership is starting to flood from all these other pitchers in the mid-range to Minaya at 9,400 up against San Diego. And this is not your typical San Diego lineup too. And we'll talk about that here in a minute, but I absolutely love Patino. I love his pedigree. I love all of the things that we've seen out of him as a young 21-year-old. I think going forward, he's going to kind of be a big part of what the Rays do or don't do in the postseason.
Do you think the reason Patino isn't getting the ownership is just because there are a lot of other pitchers that are desirable here? Because based on your sentiment, it seems like he should be higher on. What are the driving factors that are pushing his ownership down to almost single digits right now?
A lack of familiarity, I would say, would be one piece of it. We saw him obviously make his debut here with Tampa Bay, 30.5 up against the Yankees here. 97 pitches. So now we've had a couple outings, 2 back-to-back here, 98 and 97. So I guess he pitched for them on the 22nd up against Cleveland and then the 29th here. It just seems like a guy that now that he's definitely got that pitch count up to nearly 100 pitches, I just don't see the downside at this salary to be massive over, and the ownership. Those two things combined, I got to just think it's the unfamiliarity. People like the plays that they know. And like even Andrew Heaney yesterday, nobody who played him thought, Andrew Heaney won't get blown up in this spot. It was simply, there was nobody else to really play at the range. He gave you some salary flexibility and it was like an easy click, and no pitcher really particularly pitched that well yesterday that was remotely owned. But I got to think that on this slate, 7,400 just gives you so much more flexibility. I am surprised, as I said, the main contributing factor just has to be the lack of familiarity with him. He showed one flash of it here. Maybe people just want to be going a little bit more expensive to get to, the Molly and the Wheelers that they know that that's what they are. And it feels safer, quote unquote, than 7,400 Patino. But man, he should be already, from what we've seen out of him in 2 starts, he should be an 8K plus pitcher. And because he's not, that's an easy click.
I feel like it could also have something to do with people just looking at him and being like, okay, well, his last 3 starts, albeit very spread out starts, he struggled, coughed up a lot of runs, still good strikeout stuff and limited work, but there could just be that effect of people looking and being like, well, yeah, he's coming off one good start, but the rest of them, and obviously a couple of them were not starts at all. They were out of the bullpen. Maybe that's just the hesitancy, seeing that he's had one quality performance and people don't necessarily know how good his stuff actually is.
There has to be a little bit of it, but I think it's Adam that's kind of really pointed this out to me too, is that sometimes we penalize a strikeout guy who gives up a bunch of runs, whereas that just elevates his floor. Like 7.2 in those 2 starts that he had, where he also pitched 90 plus pitches. That Toronto one, let's write off Toronto, because if you face Toronto, give up some runs, whatever.
You're going to give up runs if you face Toronto. Yeah.
It's going to be bad. And then you're facing Cleveland in this spot, only 4 strikeouts, but that isn't close to what we've seen from him in the AAA level specifically. I mean, it's just going to start getting back to, I mean, is K per nine 12.58 at AAA this season? They're in Tampa. It's just, it's a ridiculous number to see there. So 10.23 here on the season so far in his limited work. It becomes an easy plug and play for me on this slate. And I can't drive that point home enough at this ownership.
All right. Any other higher? I want to get to our stacks here. We got plenty of time, right? We got still 30 minutes to go. And we'll take all of your questions. I've seen them in the premium Slack chat. We will definitely get to them if you have them in the YouTube chat, particularly. We'll hit on all of them if we can, but if you are a team member here, you got that badge, you definitely stand out, and we'll make sure to get those questions in before like 7:04, where we're doing you no service anyway. And of course, any super chats, we got you covered. But are there any other? And yeah, what's up, Larry? It's good. He said, great seeing Loughy and Eric together here. Yeah, that's fun doing a show with Eric. Man's shouldering most of the load because I've been out of the MLB shows game for a little while here, but we're getting there. Any other high price players or pitchers, sorry, that stand out to you that might actually be solid options, potentially contrarian plays? Like I guess I could ask you about, and I understand why he's not getting a ton of ownership, but Walker Buehler. The high price guys are Zach Wheeler already getting a lot. Tyler Mahle still on DraftKings getting a decent amount. And then Walker Buehler coming in around 8%. Sean Manaea at 13%. And then Lance McCullers at 1%. Those are your 5 guys north of $9,000.
So this is going to be the gross. First, well, let's start with Manaea. So Manaea is an interesting talking point because we've seen a number of times where, and it's almost impossible to project because at Awesemo, we're very diligent. We understand what top players are doing because we have so many top players. It's basically them taking their analysis, being able to plug together using the algorithms we have to put out ownership. It's the best ownership you will run into, but it is so hard to project a guy who ends up getting kind of a late bump and a late start here. 9,400 for Sean Manaea is going to make him really low owned. That number is just low. And if you look at his last 2 outings, the K's are starting to get there in a real way. 9-13 his last 2 times out, facing the San Diego team for a second time around. No Tatis, whether or not he's going to be in there ever again this season, who knows? But looking through Hosmer, Nola, Grisham, Kim on the back end of this lineup, Marisnik, there are just a lot of K potentials there. It's 55 degrees tonight in Oakland. I think Manaea should be somebody that we give a little bit more of a bump to. I'm never that crazy high on him, but I know that ownership might come in a little bit lower even than we think because that ended up being a late addition to the grouping to the start. So I'm more inclined to add more of a guy like that to the pool. It's also because he's not cheap. I mean, 9,400, I think people are going to, who have made their lineups throughout the day, aren't going to be landing on him as much. I think that naturally should be giving him a little bit more of a bump than otherwise. But the one guy that I have to talk about that makes me feel really gross, and I'm right now at 10% of the guy, but it's Lance McCullers. And Lance McCullers going up against the Dodgers. This Dodgers team is not going to be one that we're going to pick on just about ever. But playing McCullers, we know the kind of strikeout stuff when his breaking pitches are on that he has the ability to, but also a 294 expected slugging was not what I expected to see when I started digging into him a little bit today. Yeah, he can give up some hard contact time to time, but only a 6.6 degree launch angle as well. I think if we're looking to be playing up against the Dodgers right now in this spot, and I don't think we have the confirmed lineup yet. No, we do not. But I mean, yeah, 1 through 8, this is going to be a formidable team that is very difficult to get through. But if the other guys in his range fail, you should not be seeing a slate with 1% of Lance McCullers with the strikeout ability that he has. I mean, even this season, 27.9% is a decent enough number. I know it seems very strange, but he's grading out decently enough in our top pitchers tool as well, 11.5% there. I'm happy to get to 10% on this slate in large field stuff, just hoping that the other guys don't necessarily kill me. And McCullers just has his stuff on.
McCullers is good.
He's very good. Yeah,
it's funny because I was always with Jose Barrios and Sean Manaea, there was a time when they came up. Glass now was another one. Dude, I was ride or die for Glass now. And every time he come out there, gets sent back down, I was like, well, I give up on these guys, and Berríos and Manaea were never bad, but they were never like legit good fantasy options. Berríos kind of like you play him once in a while if he fell below 9K, but didn't have the strikeout stuff. And then once you get baseball's so strange, it's unlike other sports. If you waited that long for a running back to come through, it would never happen. Baseball, the moment you think they're done, it's like, okay, this guy's an all-star now. But McCullers was never not good. He just got injured. And the crazy thing about him, right, is when you look at his pitch mix, he was a 2-pitch pitcher. Then he introduces a slider. And now you're getting a guy that was already getting sick whiff rates on the curve. He's now getting good, a 17% whiff rate on the slider. So he's mixed that up. He went from legitimately a 2-pitch pitcher, right? Like Rich Hill with velocity.
But that one pitch was like a top 10 pitch in baseball when he was
the knuckle
healthy.
curve.
Yeah, it was disgusting.
Oh yeah. I'm not knocking it, but I'm saying, imagine being able to do that. And then, and when I say velocity, I mean like not Rich Hill, right. Low to mid 90s is pretty solid. I think he sits like 94 on his fast. Yeah, 94. But I'd say when you have that knuckle curve and then you introduce a slider that's actually getting pretty decent results, you start to become even more difficult to hit. And your DFS upside just becomes more appealing as well, because there's more ways to get strikeouts, man. Like his slider has a 0.049 ISO against it this season. The curve is 0.095. There's just not a lot of power coming off Lance McCullers at all. He's allowed 7 home runs in 17 starts and 97 and 2/3 innings. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a boom bust spot. It's a boom bust pitcher. I just think that there's enough upside that exists for him that I'm happy to pull the trigger.
When you say pull the trigger, right? You don't need to go Zach Wheeler ownership here. Like he's projected 1% ownership. You're 5x the field with 5%. With 10%, you're 10x the field. So it's probably important to point out that when we talk about, maybe getting some exposure to a very good pitcher with a low floor tonight, but also probably a pretty high ceiling, you don't need to go crazy on it.
And I think most people are building. I think even in like a 3 max setting, which I've tried to address talking about playing those a little bit more. I've been working on my 3 max game, trying to get a lot better in some of those, those GPPs that just seem like they just have really good pay structures over on DK. And it seems as though like McCullers would still be a stretch in something like that. But you look at it, and in baseball, you still have catcher, first base, second base, third base, shortstop, 3 outfield. So that's 8 positions, and 2 of them being pitcher. You can get so different. It's so easy in my other 8 spots because I'm almost never playing the chalk stacks in baseball. It's so easy for me to be able to go to some of the more solid plays like a Zach Wheeler. Even Sean Manaea, I'm kind of viewing as a little bit more like that today. Luis Patino. I can kind of combine those guys that I feel much better about. I don't have to get to McCullers there, but if I'm playing 20 max stuff, if I'm playing 150 max, it is so easy to look at the entire overall ownership of my lineup, especially if I'm playing a chalky. So like if I felt good the Cubs, or if I wanted to play something like that, you put Lance McCullers in there, that automatically makes you different. It's such an easy differentiating point at that position. And the upside can be massive on that, as opposed to a batter where the range of outcomes is generally 0 to 20, and you're kind of moving on with your day at pitcher. It could be -10 or 30 against the Dodgers, depending on the day. So Lance McCullers, that's kind of the way that I view him. Not somebody to really get cute with in smaller field stuff, but large field stuff, that's such an easy play and such an easy way to get different.
Sure. Not a ton of win equity just going up against Walker Buehler, but still, I get your point for sure. Let's talk stacks, but before we do, any cheap pitchers, any real low on pitchers or even relatively high on pitchers that are discounted that stand out to you, or is Patino going to pull most of that for you tonight?
Yeah, Patino makes it easy for me to kind of move along my day, and I'm playing a number of lineups, but I'm not playing enough to get crazy different with it. Garrett Richards, I'm going to be going hard pass on, especially against. Detroit's terrible. Like, I don't know how they keep kind of doing this. They have some big run outputs out of the middle of nowhere, but Garrett Richards kind of just did like it's like when an offensive coordinator just kind of like throws in the gimmick plays and then everybody knows kind of the formation and it never works again. He introduced a new pitch that's just going to start getting hit again here too. So I have no interest to go to Garrett Richards in this spot. I would say Kyle Freeland makes some sense as direct leverage we talk about how bad this entire Chicago Cubs team is. And if this game was not taking place in Coors, which is a big if, obviously it gets the Coors bump, but this lineup is not very good. It's just awful with the absence of Rizzo, with the absence of Baez, and the absence of Bryant. It's no question when you start getting Frank Schwindel and Jason Hayward and Andrew Romine and Zach Davies, the pitcher spot, as the back end of your lineup. Even the guys who strike out, the Patrick Wisdom's in the middle of it. Yeah, he's got some power, but Kyle Freeland, I think, can kind of survive in this spot. I think at his number right now, just considering he's getting no ownership whatsoever, I think he makes a lot of sense. I kind of generally play these Colorado pitchers a little bit more in Coors because they're always super cheap or they're good like German Marquez, but 6,200 for him up against this lineup. I understand it's the most popular stack of the day basically, but I'm happy to be taking that shot, especially because I get that leverage even on a 15 gamer with him.
Ready to talk some stacks?
Let's do it.
All right. Oh, and hey, by the way, if you guys tuned in late, hit that thumbs up for us. Eric pumping out some phenomenal analysis today, and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want to join, hit that join. But for real, if you haven't joined the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel and the Awesemo Odds channel yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Even if you're not a season long or dynasty or redraft or best ball player, you should definitely be a best ball player. It is addicting. So someone said it's like heroin, and it's like, well, settle down. It's great, but no, in all seriousness,
I love heroin. How could it? No.
Yeah, I mean, that's a clear definition of hyperbole, Eric.
How do you think I'm so happy? How do you think I'm so hyper? How do you think I keep talking this much? How do you think I do this?
Yeah, that's crack. But anyway, check it out. I got one video out there. It's almost at 50,000 views, so maybe you could help us get there. But just hit the subscribe. And even like I said, if you're not in the season long, what's the point of not being ready to jump on week 1 DFS when it pops up, when it comes out? It's going to be here before you know it. Preseason is going to be here before you know it. So all of that stuff, well, Awesemo Fantasy Football channel, baby. Check it out. And the Awesemo Odds channel. Great stuff on each of them. All right. So let's talk about some stacks, then we'll get to your top positions here. We'll rip through those. But really the most important thing is what teams do we like the most? Updated top stack tool is when were we updated? We were updated very recently. So let's talk about this. Let's go straight into, well, actually, no, I'm going to ask you about a team that stood out to me and see where you stand on them. Right. And no, I am certainly not a Phillies homer for anyone wondering. I am a pure pessimist in most cases, but I couldn't help but look at the fact that the Phillies had a 3.6% top stack probability, which on a 15-game slate is top 10, but then a 1.7 leverage score, which is actually the third highest leverage score on the slate. Now, the reason they're not particularly popular is because they are going to be kind of expensive. But if you're playing someone like Patino, or you're getting some value at pitcher, does it open things up? And do you think a lineup with 6 righties, of course, you have Zach Wheeler batting 9th, that doesn't count. So 6 of your actual 8 hitters are right-handed. Corbin's allowed 20 of his 22 home runs to righties this season. He's had several multiple home run games, and he has been tuned up on more occasions than one. Is there anything about this Phillies team that really holds you back and should be suppressing ownership like it is today?
No, I was on Aton's show earlier today, and I talked about how you need to be, this is my favorite bet on the board. This is my favorite spot on the board.
What show?
Philadelphia Phillies, everywhere. I was doing the iHeartRadio show with them today.
Oh, you did the iHeart one. Cool, yeah. Cool.
So we chatted through 4 sports in half an hour. It was fantastic. We just kind of played a little pinball. It was nice. But always love being able to chat with him. He's your boy, and I see why. I love that dude. So
yeah, the guy does good work.
He does great work, and he's the easiest guy to talk to in the entire world. But anyway, Philadelphia was my pick here in this spot. 105 WRC plus up against lefties too. And this is a lefty who doesn't miss bats. And the one lefty who's in this lineup at the top end, you get Bryce Harper. It really is kind of neutral. Like, it doesn't matter to me because it's Bryce Harper. And so I was going on and on about how, the -1.5 run line isn't generally the best spot to be going to. It's dropped actually from -180 to around 165, 170 in some spots over on Odd Shopper. So I think getting on the Phillies in this spot, if you're playing some sports betting to help with your stuff, as well as just stacking up these Phillies, I think they should have more ownership than what they do on this slate. I just think that there's a really good chance for them to get after Corbin, who is getting by on name recognition alone. Because if it was a different name, if you put up like Eric Lindquist as the starting pitcher of the Washington Nationals today, I would get murdered. Like, you'd be looking at his underlying numbers and you'd be like, yeah, that dude's trash. And you might think that anyway, but you know what? I don't really care. Love it. For the most part, all the love. But back to heroin, of course. There I go.
Yeah, he has a 378 expected WOBA against righties, a 219 x ISO. I mean, are those insanely bad? No, but when you're in the almost a 400, 200 club, as I've always, referred to it as, that's not really good. His actual WOBA is 378, actual ISO 229 against righties. That's really where all the power comes from. And it's not like Bryce Harper as a lefty can't still get things done. So I just thought that stood out to me with such low ownership. And I think your analysis there is sound. But yeah, you're right. If you put your face and name in front of his stats, or my face and name in front of his stats, you'd be like, all right, so we're stacking anyone who faces him tonight.
That's exactly it. And
you're absolutely right.
It's the Madison Bumgarner bump. It's the same thing where people see the name and they don't think of it naturally. I think people are starting to come around to stacking on Madison Bumgarner, and he's on this slate. We haven't even brought up his name. Like that should be a little bit of the talking point too, is like, we didn't even say Patrick years ago, and I did bring up Patrick Corbin on the slate. You'd probably all slap me and be like, I'm an idiot, because he's obviously one of the best pitcher plays on the slate. He's pretty much the opposite now.
Yeah, he absolutely is. Let's talk about some of the highest projected stacks today. A lot of them always have negative leverage scores, just because when you have the highest top stack potential, you're going to be pretty popular, especially if you're relatively affordable. Coors Field, the Colorado Rockies, they are, of course, going to be, I believe, as it stands right now, since the last update, the most popular stack. And I don't know, where do you stand on them today, going up in the Coors Field against Chicago, against Zach Davies? And I should point this out so you can hit on both teams, and I'll just sit back and listen. I'll what did I say? I'll hang up and listen. But as far as ownership stands right now, you've got Colorado and the White Sox both in the top 5 because of Coors Field.
Okay, so this is kind of the talking point, the Colorado Rockies. We just got done talking about Kyle Freeland on one side here. This Colorado team is a hard one to get a gauge on because they just aren't good. Like, they're a very bad baseball team. And when you get a bad baseball team that ends up being super chalk just because of a spot or because of facing a simple pitcher, I just look at it as the whole. Like, for me, this is 29 other teams that we can pick from, 27 for me because I'm lower on 5-mans of the Yankees and the Rockies and the Cubs, but we have 27 other teams. And this is kind of a golf betting aside, but when you're looking at the top odds of certain golfers that you're betting, you don't necessarily want to gravitate just to the top because there's no value to be had. There's no value to be had by stacking up Colorado today because all of the guys are starting to get ownership up and down the entire lineup. I'm not even worried about or talking about the weather, but there's nobody in this lineup coming in underneath 10%, basically. I mean, Elias Diaz and Hilliard rate at 10%, but how do you get different with this team? And considering I get the entire field in this spot, going up against, just by removing Colorado out of my pool, or I didn't remove them, but I capped them all right around 8%, so that I'm not getting any egregious amount in my stacks, like in my entire portfolio. It just feels like such an easier thing to be light on. You don't have to, there's no way to get different with it. I don't see any way around it. And I understand the matchup. I understand that we're looking at two pitchers here that aren't necessarily good. Zach Davies, I love targeting. This guy is terrible at throwing baseballs, but you got to let baseball play out once in a while. So like, they could put up 8 or 9 runs, but I have 27 other teams that I get to pick and choose from that are coming in at flat ownership or under-owned. Give me that every single time in baseball.
All right. So we went hard on pitchers because you got to dig deep.
Right.
Who are your favorite stacks today and your favorite fades? Then we'll hit on the super chat and then shout out some of our winners with the Awesemo avatar and then get to all of your questions. We still got time. We got about 15 minutes to go.
Yeah, so I'm underneath like 4% total stacks on Colorado, New York, and the Cubbies. So those 3 right off the top, those are my fades. That's just kind of like going down with the ship. I said it's going to be a headache with the Yankees going forward because all of those guys, there's no denying the power potential, but tell me you can pick and choose between them here. I think stacking them up is going to be a difficult thing just going forward because you're not going to get any leverage going their direction. They're going to get ownership every single slate. So if I'm going to make the same rule about the Cubs and the Rockies, I got to do the same thing here with New York. So 3 fades there. San Francisco, their lineup ended up being completely garbage, and the ownership hasn't really changed. So I'm going to be pumping the brakes on them as well. That's my 4 fades kind of put out there. My favorite stacks to be going to, I think Oakland really makes a lot of sense here on one side of the mound. I don't know the right way of phrasing that, but obviously Blake Snell, it's no question the kind of issues this guy's been having. I went on a complete deep dive tangent about him the other week, talking about all of the different changes. The Ks are still there. That's about it though. 442 expected slugging, 14% walk rate, and you're adding Starling Marte to the top of the lineup. Starling Marte is my favorite one-off in this entire slate, not to identify one guy, but the stolen base and power upside that he brings coming from the Marlins to the A's. It's not like he gets a ballpark downgrade. I mean, yeah, it's 55 degrees. It's Oakland. That's not a good ballpark. Neither was the park in Miami for him. But like him specifically makes a great one-off, and this entire stack as a whole too. Matt Olson, Jed Lowry, Yan Gomes. I mean, Yan Gomes sitting there 2K in the 5 hole. Oh, I mean, this entire team I'm going to like stacking up, especially 1 through 6. And it's so easy to be able to just do that. You don't have to try to play any of the weaker hitters on the back end because they're so low owned here. I love going to Oakland. So we talked about them here. Another team that I absolutely am going to be stacking up like crazy again, Milwaukee. And I talked about yesterday, Eduardo Escobar was my home run call. He ends up just going completely nuts, broke the slate yesterday. That was great. If I had gotten my lineups in, that would have worked out really well for me. But the Milwaukee Brewers set up really well in this spot as well. Adrian Hauser on one side. He's just got nothing. He's got nothing here in defense of some of these lefties. I really like getting to all of them, specifically Escobar as well. I don't think he's going to come in under-owned, and this team is getting a decent number of ownership. I think like basically flat 4%, which on a 30 teams to pick from, that's a decent enough number. But I just think the stack is kind of set up well with Wong, Adames, Narvaez, Escobar at the top end. And then you get Tellez still at 3K, Tyrone Taylor, 2.8K. Lorenzo Cain in the 8 hole here from Milwaukee, 1 through 8. You can kind of piece this team together, 5.5 total implied runs. Love Milwaukee too. So those are kind of my 2 under the radar stacks to really be looking at.
All right. So we had a request for home run calls for dong picks. By the way, Jordan said if we get to 250 likes, he's got a surprise for us. He did put something together. He DM'd it to me. It's pretty good. Eric, I think you will thoroughly enjoy it. It actually speaks to what we were talking about with Patrick Corbin. No. It's
Am I though? Okay,
no, I'm serious. You will enjoy this. It's good.
You got my DM from earlier, the Josh and Eric picks. You know.
Yeah, things. That was good. That's not that. I mean, it's definitely not that. It's wholesome. It's wholesome.
Okay.
I'll go first with the home run pick. The easiest one to do would be for me to just say Aaron Judge. Think about this. They've got. Did you see their implied total today?
Yeah, 6.5 or something stupid.
6.5, right? So you have 6.5 implied total. These are some of the most outrageous numbers ever. Against lefties this season, he has a 483 x WOBA and a 359 x ISO against left. Like you can't. Of course, WOBA less important than ISO, but a 273 actual ISO against lefties. Just load that up in the hopper for a home run pick and thank me later. But I'll go with a more off the board one. I'll continue to pick on Patrick Corbin, and I'll go with Rhys Hoskins because, well, Rhys Hoskins.
Okay, love that.
Yeah, why not? Right, the guy is not someone that you're ever going to put a bet on to reach base safely every game because he's just not something. That's not really what he does. But he has a strong splits against lefties as he should. Matter of fact, monster numbers. You want to talk about close to just 396 weighted on base average, 311 isolated slugging, 148 WRC plus. He's got 9 home runs and 120 or 44 plate appearances against southpaws. So give me Rhys today. What do you got?
Well, Rhys is a good one. So I'll give you my obvious Shohei Ohtani here. Late add to the pool. Again, I love playing these dudes to get added to stuff late. I don't think Shohei is going to come in under-owned by any means. I think we had 20% of him in our last run, and that seems about right going up against Lyles here. Oh, my God.
How awesome is that? Dude, how awesome is that?
When he loses his arm, dude, I remember that movie like it was yesterday. He loses all the arm strength and, just lobs it on in there. We got you. Oh, Okay, that's my favorite one.
That's good.
Seems
right?
a little bit better than Elsa. I don't know. Maybe
good.
that's just me, but that's a personal opinion.
I would buy an NFT of that.
Would you though?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. There I am.
0.00004 Ether.
Why are movie studios not pumping out NFTs right now? I don't understand. You have Marvel, you have all of these different things. You could make it like, I don't know. That's a completely different tangent.
Let's get back on track here. Yes, Dong Picks has been a running joke in the industry. It's such an absurd statement or word, series of words that I've always, and a lot of people that I know have used. So it's not lost. The irony is not lost on me. So Eric, let's do that. And then we'll hit on some questions here.
All right. So for me, my guy is Eloy Jimenez in the 4-hole. Ended up back in the lineup here today. Crazy amount of power going up against the lefty here, Chris Bubich. Eloy just he was a late ad here. Again, somebody that was projected to possibly get back here on the early part of this week. He's back in there now here. This White Sox team is a team that I said I want to be invested in going forward, and specifically getting him back. And then if they get Robert back here in the near future as well. But I mean, even just in a limited sample, I mean, let me just pull up his 2020 numbers against lefties here for one Eloy Jimenez, because they are just absolutely stupid. Actually, I just have his stats as a whole here. Last year, 14 homers in the limited year. 296, 332, 559 slash line, 890 OPS. The guy just absolutely crushes baseball. Statcast loves the man. Eloy Jimenez is going to go yard.
I like it. Okay, let's rapid fire some questions off here. We had a super chat from Malcolm. So Eric, he says, who for catcher and first base on DraftKings and FanDuel? Go.
Okay, so I love Real Muto and Hoskins, and we talked about the Phillies. We already kind of touched base on them. So let's eat our chalk. I mean, they're not chalk. That's the best part. So right. Let's go with both of them.
All right. We got some questions from Premium Slack chat. Let me see what we've got here. Of course, it loads slowly, but that's just the way it works, right? We'll do it live.
Is the way it is. We'll do it live.
Okay, here we go. Bote or Castro for the Pirates on DraftKings?
I mean, Bodie is in Coors. And again, I talked about fading it, but that's, if you're looking for one play, depending on how chalky the rest of your lineup is, Bodie. Okay.
If I can't get to all you guys, sorry, I may have missed them. Send them again. If I missed them, send them again and we'll get there. But there's a lot in here. SP2, DraftKings, GPP, Suarez or Patino. That's an obvious one for Eric.
Yeah, Patino, easy.
Yeah,
easy.
Pretty simple. Take a look at anything we've got going on in the YouTube chat. We got about 4 minutes here. Let's see. And if you have anything else you want to throw out there, which scrub will hit 2 or 3 home runs?
Okay. Cool. How about Wilmer Flores?
Okay. AJ says weather at Coors. Okay. I can look. I know our boy El Negro Loco, the news guy, said earlier that we should be good on the weather front. Yeah, it looks fine to me. Yeah,
everything looks good, except the only one that you have to pay attention to is Coors and Cubs, and I'm not there anyway, so I don't have to think about it.
Yeah, I think we're okay. Eric, did you get your lineups out?
I did get my lineups. Thank you so much, Jordan Klein, for being so nice to me all the time.
That was a solid little job that he did with that gift, though. I mean, you got to hand it to him. It's pretty solid.
He's quick. He's the best producer we have at Awesemo, named Jordan.
Isn't it funny though how he has progressed over the last year and a half? I mean, this man has come a long way. Absolutely. El Negro Loco says that Colorado game will play. And then he called everybody idiots for asking the question.
Oh, okay. Well,
he didn't do that. He didn't do that.
Loco would never. I love Loco too much.
He did say they will play though. 261 likes, by the way. Appreciate you guys. Subscribe to that channel if you haven't done so yet. I don't have time to do the Hall of Fame thing, but I will say that we had Michael Campbell, and we'll keep the other ones in there for tomorrow, Jordan. Why not, if we can? Michael Campbell, who's always in chat, always talking on Twitter. Follow Eric at Eric Lindquist, myself at Loughy_D. Took down 25K yesterday, and I was very happy for him. We have that in there, but he gets a free month of Awesemo Plus as well, because if you use the Awesemo avatar and you go to awesemo.com/avatar, and you use that, whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, wherever you are, if you use that avatar and you finish top 3 in a field of 5,000 or more, not only do you probably win a lot of money, but you also get a free Awesemo Plus monthly pass, everything included on the site. It's right around the $100 value. All you have to do is tweet us at Awesemo HOF. Jordan, put it up on the screen. Awesemo HOF. It's Awesemo Hall of Fame. And if you have that avatar, top 3 in a field of 5,000 or more, we got you covered with a free monthly subscription, Awesemo Plus. Oh, here's a question. All right, Eric. And yeah, again, awesemo.com/avatar. Jordan will put it up there. Jeremiah says, Braves, Phillies bats for the, it's not a question, it's a comment. Braves, Phillies bats for the money tonight. Good luck, y'all. Yeah, I don't know, man. These slates are so weird, right? Because 1% owned teams 1% owned teams can certainly win slates when there's 15 games.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta 4% right now, 5% ownership that we're looking at for them. Phillies, we count the ways that we love the Phillies. All of the ways here for them. Love the spot for both of them for sure. They shouldn't be that highly owned. Should be easy to get different. Good luck to us all with that.
That's right. All right. Well, Jordan, thanks for producing as always. Thanks to you guys for hanging out. It's been fun. It eased me back into it nicely. Eric, you made my life a little bit easier as well. We'll catch you back here next time on Live Before Lock. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. Remember, Awesemo Fantasy Football Channel, Awesemo Odds Channel. Come hang out with me. Maybe you missed me a little bit. You want to hang out? Well, that's where I am almost every single day of the week. We got a live show at 2 p.m. every day. We got videos on demand. We got you covered, baby. Let's do it. Heading into the season. See you back here, Live Before Lock, MLB edition tomorrow, same time.